Chapter 20. The Habit of Command. West sat in the Lord Marshal's tent and stared hopelessly into space. For the past year, he had scarcely had an idle moment. Now, suddenly, there was nothing for him to do but wait. He kept expecting to see Burr push through the flap and walk to the maps, his fists clenched behind him. He kept expecting to feel his reassuring presence around the camp, to hear his booming voice call the wayward officers to order. But of course he would not. Not now and not ever again. On the left sat General Croy's staff, solemn and sinister in their black uniforms, as rigidly pressed as ever. On the right lounged Polder's men, top buttons carelessly undone in an open affront to their opposite numbers, as puffed up as peacocks displaying their tail feathers. The two great generals themselves eyed each other with all the suspicion of rival armies across a battlefield, awaiting the edict that would raise one of them to the closed council and the heights of power, and dash the other's hopes forever. The edict that would name the new king of the Union, and his new Lord Marshal. It was to be Polder or Croy, of course, and both anticipated their final glorious victory over the other. In the meantime, the army, and West in particular, sat paralyzed, powerless. Far to the north, the dogman and his companions, who had saved West's life in the wilderness more times than he could remember, were no doubt fighting for survival, watching desperately for help that would never come. For West, the entire business was very much like being at his own funeral, and one attended chiefly by sneering, grinning, posturing enemies. It was to be Polder or Croy, and whichever one it was, he was doomed. Polder hated him with a flaming passion, Croy with an icy scorn. The only fall swifter and more complete than his own would be that of Polder, or of Croy, whichever of them was finally overlooked by the closed council. There was a dim commotion outside, and heads turned keenly to look. There was a scuffle of feet up to the tent, and several officers rose anxiously from their chairs. The flap was torn aside, and the knight herald finally burst jingling through it. He was immensely tall, the wings on his helmet almost poking a hole in the tent's ceiling as he straightened up. He had a leather case over one armored shoulder, stamped with the golden sun of the Union. West stared at it, holding his breath. "Present your message," urged Croy, holding out his hand. "Present it to me," snapped Polder. The two men jostled each other with scant dignity while the knight herald frowned down at them, impassive. "Is Colonel West in attendance?" he demanded, in a booming bass. Every eye, and most especially those of Polder and Croy, swiveled round. West found himself rising hesitantly from his chair. I am West." The knight herald stepped carelessly around General Croy and advanced on West, spurs rattling. He opened his dispatch case, pulled out a roll of parchment, and held it up. "On the king's orders." The final irony of West's unpredictable career, it seemed, was that he would be the one to announce the name of the man who would dismiss him in dishonor moments later. But if he was to fall on his sword, delay would only increase the pain. He took the scroll from the knight's gauntleted hand and broke the heavy seal. He unrolled it halfway, a block of flowing script coming into view. The room held its breath as he began to read. West gave vent to a disbelieving giggle. Even with the tent as tense as a courtroom waiting for judgment, he could not help himself. He had to go over the first section twice more before he came close to taking it in. "What is amusing?" demanded Croy. "The Open Council has elected Jezal Dan Luthar as the new king of the Union, henceforth known as Jezal I. West had to stifle more laughter, even though, if it was a joke, it was not a funny one. "Luthar," someone asked. "Who the hell is Luthar?" "That boy who won the contest." It was all somehow awfully appropriate. Jezal had always behaved as though he was better than everyone else. Now, it seemed he was. But all of that, momentous though it might have been, was a side issue here. "Who is the new Lord Marshal?" growled Croy, and the two staffs shuffled forward, all on their feet now, forming a half-circle of expectation. West took a deep breath, gathered himself like a child preparing to plunge into an icy pool. He pulled the scroll open, and his eyes scanned quickly over the lower block of writing. He frowned. Neither Polder's name nor Croy's appeared anywhere. He read it again, more carefully. His knees felt suddenly very weak. "Who does it name?" Polder nearly shrieked. West opened his mouth, but he could not find the words. He held the letter out, and Polder snatched it from his hand while Croy struggled unsuccessfully to look over his shoulder. "No," breathed Polder. Evidently having reached the end, Croy wrestled the dispatch away, and his eyes flickered over it. This must be a mistake. But the Knight Herald did not think so. The closed council are not in the habit of making mistakes. You have the king's orders. He turned to West and bowed. My Lord Marshal, I bid you farewell. The army's best and brightest all gawped at West, jaws dangling. Yes, he managed to stammer. Yes, of course. An hour later, the tent was empty. West sat alone at Burr's writing desk, nervously arranging and rearranging the pen, ink, paper, and most of all the large letter he had just sealed with a blob of red wax. He frowned down at it, and up at the maps on the boards, and back down at his hands sitting idle on the scarred leather. And he tried to understand what the hell had happened. As far as he could tell, he had been suddenly elevated to one of the highest positions in the Union. Lord Marshal West. With the possible exception of Bethod himself, he was the most powerful man on this side of the Circle C. Polder and Croy would be obliged to call him Sir. He had a chair on the closed council. Him, Colum West, a commoner who had been scorned and bullied and patronized his entire life. How could it possibly have happened? Not through merit, certainly. Not through any action or inaction on his part. Through pure chance. A chance friendship with a man who, in many ways, he did not particularly like, and had certainly never expected to do him any favors. A man who, in a stroke of fortune that could only be described as a miracle, had now ascended to the throne of the Union. His disbelieving laughter was short-lived. A most unpleasant image was forming in his head. Prince Ladisla, lying somewhere in the wilderness with his head broken open, half naked and unburied. West swallowed. If it had not been for him, Ladisla would now be king, and he would be swabbing latrines instead of preparing to take command of the army. His head was starting to hurt, and he rubbed uncomfortably at his temples. Perhaps he had played a crucial part in his own advancement after all. The tent flap rustled as Pike came through with his burned-out ruin of a grin. General Croy is here. General Croy is here. Let him sweat a moment. But it was West who was sweating. He wiped his moist palms together and tugged the jacket of his uniform smooth, his colonel's insignia but recently cut from the shoulders. He had to appear to be in complete and effortless control, just as Marshal Burr had always done, just as Marshal Varuz had used to, out in the dry wastelands of Gurkish. He had to squash Polder and Croy while he had the chance. If he did not do it now, he would be forever at their mercy. A piece of meat, torn between two furious dogs. He reluctantly picked up the letter and held it out to Pike. "Could we not just hang the pair of them, sir?" asked the convict as he took it. "If only. But we cannot do without them, however troublesome they may be. A new king, a new Lord Marshal, both men that by and large no one has ever heard of. The soldiers need leaders they know." He took a long breath through his nose, puffing out his chest. Each man had to do his part, and that was all. He let it hiss out. "Show in General Croy, please." "Yes, sir." Pike held the tent flap open and roared out, "General Croy!" Croy's black uniform, chased about the collar with embroidered golden leaves, was so heavily starched that it was a surprise he could move at all. He drew himself up and stood to vibrating attention, eyes fixed on the middle distance. His salute was impeccable, every part of his body in regulation position, and yet he somehow managed to make his contempt and disappointment plain to see. "May I first offer my congratulations," he grated, "Lord Marshal." "Thank you, General," graciously said. "A considerable promotion, for one so young, so inexperienced. I have been a professional soldier some dozen years, and fought in 2 wars and several battles. It would seem His Majesty the King deems me sufficiently seasoned." Croy cleared his throat. "Of course, Lord Marshal. But you are new to high command. In my opinion, you would be wise to seek the assistance of a more experienced man." "I agree with you absolutely." Croy lifted one eyebrow a fraction. "I'm glad to hear that. That man should, without the slightest doubt, be General Polder." To give him credit, Croy's face did not move. A small squeak issued from his nose. The only indication of what West did not doubt was his boundless dismay. He had been hurt when he arrived. Now he was reeling. The very best time to plunge the blade into the hilt. I have always been a great admirer of General Polder's approach to soldiering. His dash, his vigor. He is, to my mind, the very definition of what an officer should be. Quite so, hissed Croy through gritted teeth. I am taking his advice in a number of areas. There is only one major issue upon which we differed. Indeed? You, General Croy. Croy's face had assumed the color of a plucked chicken. The trace of scorn replaced quick time by a definite tinge of horror. Polder was of the opinion that you should be dismissed immediately. I was for giving you one more chance. Sergeant Pike, sir, the ex-convict stepped forward smartly and held out the letter. West took it from him and displayed it to the general. This is a letter to the king. I begin by reminding him of the happy years we served together in Adua. I go on to lay out in detail the reasons for your immediate dismissal in dishonor. Your unrepentant stubbornness, General Croy, your tendency to steal the credit, your bloodless inflexibility, your insubordinate reluctance to work with other officers. If it was possible for Croy's face to grow yet more drawn and pale, it did so, steadily, as he stared at the folded paper. I earnestly hope that I will never have to send it, but I will, at the slightest provocation to myself or to General Polder. Am I understood? Croy appeared to grope for words. Perfectly understood. He croaked in the end, "My Lord Marshal, excellent. We are extremely tardy in setting off for our rendezvous with our northern allies, and I hate to arrive late to a meeting. You will transfer your cavalry to my command, for now. I will be taking them north with General Polder, in pursuit of Bethod. And I, sir, a few Northmen still remain on the hills above us. It will be your task to sweep them away and clear the road to Carleon, giving our enemies the impression that our main body has not moved north. Succeed in that, and I may be willing to trust you with more. You will make the arrangements before first light." Croy opened his mouth, as though about to complain at the impossibility of the request. "You have something to add?" The general quickly thought better of it. "No, sir. Before first light, of course." He even managed to force his face into a shape vaguely resembling a smile. West did not have to try too hard to smile back. "I am glad you are embracing this chance to redeem yourself, General. You are dismissed." Croy snapped to attention once more, spun on his heel, caught his leg up with his saber and stumbled from the tent in some disarray. West took a long breath. His head was pounding. He wanted nothing more than to lie down for a few moments, but there was no time. He tugged the jacket of his uniform smooth again. If he had survived that nightmare journey north through the snow, he could survive this. Send in General Polder. Polder swaggered into the tent as though he owned the place and stood to slapdash attention, his salute as flamboyant as Croy's had been rigid. "Lord Marshal West, I would like to extend to you my earnest congratulations on your unexpected advancement." He grinned unconvincingly, but West did not join him. He sat there, frowning up at Polder as if he was a problem that he was considering a harsh solution to. He sat there for some time, saying nothing. The general's eyes began to dart nervously around the tent. He gave an apologetic cough. "Might I ask, Lord Marshal, what you had to discuss with General Croy?" "Why, all manner of things." West kept his face stony hard. "My respect for General Croy on all matters military is boundless. We are much alike, he and I. His precision, his attention to detail. He is, to my mind, the very definition of what a soldier should be. He is a most accomplished officer," Polder managed to hiss. "He is. I have been elevated with great rapidity to my position, and I feel I need a senior man, a man with a wealth of experience, to act as a trickedens, as a mentor, if you will, now that Marshal Burr is gone. General Croy has been good enough to agree to serve in that capacity." "Has he indeed?" A sheen of sweat was forming across Polder's forehead. "He has made a number of excellent suggestions, which I am already putting into practice. There was only one issue on which we could not agree." He steepled his fingers on the desk before him and looked sternly at Polder over the top of them. "You were that issue, General Polder. You." "I, Lord Marshal?" "Croy pressed for your immediate dismissal." Polder's fleshy face was rapidly turning pink. "But I have decided to extend to you one final opportunity." West picked up the very same paper that he had displayed to Croy. "This is a letter to the king." I begin by thanking him for my promotion, by inquiring after his health, by reminding him of our close personal friendship. I go on to lay out in detail the reasons for your immediate cashiering in disgrace. Your unbecoming arrogance, General Polder, your tendency to steal the credit, your reluctance to obey orders, your stubborn inability to work with other officers. I earnestly hope that I will never have to send it. But I will at the slightest provocation. The slightest provocation to myself or to General Croy, am I understood? Polder swallowed, sweat glistening all over his ruddy face. You are my Lord Marshal. Good. I am trusting General Croy to seize control of the hills between us and Carlion. Until you prove yourself worthy of a separate command, you will stay with me. I want your division ready to move north before first light, and the swiftest units to the fore. Our northern allies are relying on us, and I do not mean to let them down. At first light, General, and with the greatest speed. The greatest speed, of course. You can rely on me, sir? I hope so, in spite of my reservations. Every man must do his part. General Polder. Every man. Polder blinked and worked his mouth, half turned to leave, remembered belatedly to salute, then strode from the tent. West watched the flap moving ever so gently in the wind outside. Then he sighed, crumpled the letter up in his hand and tossed it away into the corner. It was nothing but a blank sheet of paper, after all. Pike raised one pink, mostly hairless brow. Sweetly done, sir, if I may say. Even in the camps, I never saw better lying. Thank you, Sergeant. Now that I begin, I find I warm to the work. My father always warned me against untruths, but between you and me, the man was a shit, a coward and a failure. If he was here now, I'd spit in his face. West rose and walked to the largest scale of the maps, stood before it, his hands clasped behind his back. In just the way that Marshal Burr would have done, he realized. He examined the dirty finger smudge in the mountains where Crummock-I Fail had indicated the position of his fortress. He traced the route to the Union Army's own current position, far to the south, and frowned. It was hard to believe that a Union cartographer could ever have come close to surveying that terrain in person, and the flamboyant shapes of the hills and rivers had an undoubted flavor of make-believe about them. How long do you think it will take to get there, sir? Asked Pike. Impossible to say. Even if they got started immediately, which was unlikely. Even if Polder did as he was told, which was doubly so. Even if the map was halfway accurate, which he knew it was not. He shook his head grimly. Impossible to say. Chapter 21. The first day. The eastern sky was just catching fire. Long strips of pink cloud and long strips of black cloud were stretched out across the pale blue, the hazy gray shapes of mountains notched and jagged as a butcher's knife underneath. The western sky was a mass of dark iron, still cold and comfortless. Nice day for it, said Crummock. Aye, but Logen wasn't sure there was any such a thing. Well, if Bethod don't show, and we get nothing killed at all, at least you lot will have done wonders for my wall, eh? It was amazing how well and how fast a man could patch a wall, when it was the pile of stones that might save his own life. A few short days, and they had the whole stretch of it built up and mortared, most of the ivy cut away. From inside the fort, where the ground was that much higher, it didn't look too fearsome. From outside it was 3 times the height of a tall man up to the walkway. They'd made new the parapet neck-high at the top, with plenty of good slots for shooting and throwing rocks from, then dug out a decent ditch in front and lined it with sharp stakes. They were still digging, over on the left where the wall met the cliff, and it was easiest to climb over. That was Dow's stretch, and Logen could hear him shouting at his boys over the sound of shovels. Get digging, you lazy fucks. I'll not be killed for your lack of work. Put your back into it, you bastards. And so on, all day long. One way of getting work out of a man, Logen reckoned. Dug the ditch out especially deep right in front of the old gate, a nice reminder to everyone that there were no plans to leave. But it was still the weakest spot, and there was no missing it. That was where Logen would be, if Bethod came. Right in the middle, on Shiver's stretch of wall. He was standing above the archway now, not far from Logen and Crummock, his long hair flapping about in the breeze, pointing out some cracks that still needed mortaring. Wall's looking good, Logen shouted at him. Shivers looked round, worked his mouth, then spat over his shoulder. "Aye," he growled and turned away. Crummock leaned close. "If it comes to a battle, you'll have to watch your back with that one bloody 9. I reckon so. The middle of a fight was a good place to settle a score with a man on your own side. No one ever checked too carefully if the corpses got it in the back or the front once the fighting was done. Everyone too busy crying at their cuts, or digging, or running away." Logen gave the big hillman a long stare. "I'll have a lot of men to watch if it comes to a battle. We ain't so very friendly that you won't be one of 'em." "Likewise," said Crummock, grinning all the way across his big bearded face. "We both got a reputation for being none too picky who gets killed once the killing starts. But that's no bad thing. Too much trust makes men sloppy. Too much trust. It had been a while since Logen had too much of anything except enemies." He jerked his thumb towards the tower. "I'm going up. Check if they've seen anything." "I hope they have," said Crummock, rubbing his fat palms together. "I hope that bastard comes today." Logen hopped down from the wall and walked out across the fort, if you could call it that, past carls and hillmen, sat in groups eating, or talking, or cleaning weapons. A few who'd been on guard through the night wrapped up in blankets, asleep. He passed the pen where the sheep were huddled together, a good deal fewer than there had been. He passed the makeshift forge set up near the stone shed, a couple of soot-smeared men working a bellows, another pouring metal into molds for arrowheads. They'd need a damn lot of arrowheads if Bethod came calling. He came to the narrow steps cut into the rock face and took them 2 at a time, up above the fort to the top of the tower. There was a big pile of rocks for throwing up there, on that shelf on the mountainside, and 6 big barrels wedged full of shafts. The pick of the archers stood at the new mortared parapets, the men with the best eyes and the best ears keeping watch for Bethod. Logen saw the dogman in amongst the rest, with Grim on one side of him, and Tall on the other. "Chief!" It still made Logen smile to say it. A long time they'd done things the other way around, but it worked a lot better like this to his mind. At least no one was scared all the time. Not of their own chief, anyway. "See anything?" The dogman grinned round and offered him out a flask. "A lot, as it goes." Said Grim. The sun was getting up above the mountains now, slitting the clouds with bright lines, eating into the shadows across the hard land, burning away the dawn haze. The great fells loomed up bold and careless on either side, smeared with yellow-green grass and fern on the slopes, strips of bare rock breaking through the brown summits. Below, the bare valley was quiet and still, spotted with thorn bushes and clumps of stunted trees, creased with the paths of dried-out streams, just as empty as it had been the day before, and the day before that, and ever since they'd got there. It reminded Logen of his youth, climbing up in the high places alone, days at a time, testing himself against the mountains, before his was a name that anyone had heard of, before he married, or had children, and before his wife and his children went back to the mud, the happy valleys of the past. He sucked in a long, cold breath of the high air and he blew it out. "It's quite a spot for a view, all right. But I meant, have we seen anything of our old friend?" "You mean Bethod, the right royal king of the Northmen?" No sign of him. Not a hair." Tull shook his big head. "Would have expected there to be some sign by now if he was coming." Logen sloshed some water round his mouth and spat it out over the side of the tower, watched it splatter on the rocks way down below. "Maybe he won't fall for it." He could see the happy side of Bethod not coming. Vengeance is a nice enough notion at a distance, but the getting of it close up isn't so very pretty, especially when you're outnumbered 10-1 with nowhere to run to. "Maybe he wanted that," said Dogman, wistful. "How's the wall?" "All right, long as they don't bring such a thing as a ladder with them." "How long do you reckon we wait before we, grunted Grim, his long finger pointing down into the valley. Logen saw a flicker of movement down there, and again he swallowed. A couple of men, maybe, creeping through the boulders like beetles through gravel. He felt the men tense up all around him, heard them muttering. "Shit," he hissed. He looked sideways at the dogman, and the dogman looked back. "Seems like Crummock's plan worked. Seems that way. Far as getting Bethod to follow us, at least. Aye, the rest is the tricky bit. The bit that was more than likely to get them all killed. But Logen knew they were all thinking it without him saying a word. Now we just hope that the Union keeps their end of the deal, said Dogman. We hope. Logen tried to smile, but it didn't come out too good. Hoping had never turned out that well for him. Once they'd started coming, the valley had filled up quick, right in front of Dogman's eyes, nice and clean, just the way Bethod had always done things. The standards were set out between the two rock faces, 3 times a good bow shot distant, and the carles and the thralls were pressed in tight around him, all looking up towards their wall. The sun was getting up high in a blue sky with just a few shreds of cloud to cast a shadow, and all that white of steel flashed and sparkled like the sea under the moon. Their signs were all there, old Bethod's best from way back Whitesides, goring, pale as snow, Littlebone. Then there were others sharp and ragged marks from out past the Crinna. Wild men made dark and bloody deals with Bethod. Dogman could hear them whooping and calling to each other, strange sounds like animals might make in the forest, quite a gathering, all in all. And the Dogman could smell the fear and the doubt thick as soup up on the wall. A lot of weapons being fingered, a lot of lips being chewed. He did his best to keep his face hard and careless, the way that Three Trees would have done, the way a chief should, however much his own knees wanted to tremble. How many now, you reckon? Asked Logen. Dogman let his eyes wander over him, thinking about it. 8,000, do you think, or 10, maybe. A pause. That's about what I was thinking. A lot more than us, anyway, Dogman said, keeping his voice low. Aye, but fights aren't always won by the bigger numbers. Course not. Dogman worked his lips as he looked at all the men. Just mostly. There was plenty going on down there, up at the front, shovels glinting, a ditch and an earth rampart taking shape, all across the valley. Doing some digging o' their own, grunted Dow. Always was thorough, was Bethod, said Dogman. Taking his time. Doing it right. Logen nodded. Make sure none of us get away. Dogman heard the sound of Crummock's laughter behind him. Getting away wasn't ever the purpose of this, though, eh? Bethod's own standard was going up now, near to the back, but still towering over the others. Huge, great thing, red circle on black. Dogman frowned at it, flapping in the breeze. He remembered seeing it months ago, back in Anglia, back when Three Trees had still been alive, and Cathal too. He worked his tongue round his sour mouth. King o' the fucking Northmen, he muttered. A few men came out from the front where they were digging, started walking up towards the wall. 5 of 'em, all in good armor, the one at the front with his arms spread out wide. Jawing time, muttered Dow. Then gob down into the ditch. They came up close, the 5, up in front of the patched-up gate, mailcoats shining dull in the brightening sun. The first of 'em had long white hair and one white eye, and one too hard to remember. White Eye Hansel. He looked older than he used to, but didn't they all? He'd been the one to ask Three Trees to surrender at Uefrith, and been told to piss off. He'd had shit thrown down on him at Hyonan. He'd offered duels to Black Dow, and to Tol Duru, and to Harding Grim. Duels against Bethod's champion. Duels against the Bloody Nine. He'd done a lot of talking for Bethod, and he'd told a lot of lies. That shite-eye Hansel down there, jeered Black Dow at him. Still sucking on Bethod's cock, are you? The old warrior grinned up at them. Man's got to feed his family somehow, don't he? And one cock tastes pretty much like another, if you ask me. Don't pretend like your mouths ain't all tasted salty enough before. He had some kind of point there, the Dogman had to admit. They had all fought for Bethod themselves after all. What are you after, Hansel? He shouted. Bethod want to surrender to us, does he? You'd have thought so, wouldn't you, outnumbered like he is? But that's not why I'm here. He's ready to fight just like always, but I'm more of a talker than a fighter. And I talked him into giving you all a chance. I got 2 sons down there in with the rest. And call me selfish, but I'd rather not have 'em in harm's way. I'm hoping we can maybe talk our way clear of this. Don't seem too likely, shouted Dogman. But give it a go if you must. I've got nothing else pressing on today. Here's the thing, then. Bethod don't particularly want to waste time and sweat and blood on climbing your little shit pile of a wall. He's got business with the Southerners he wants to get settled. It's scarcely worth the breath of pointing out the bastard of a fix you're in. We've got the numbers more 10 to 1, I reckon. Much more, and you've no way out. Bethod says any man wants to give up now can go in peace. All he has to do is give over his weapons. In his head soon afterwards, eh? Barked Dow. Hansel took a big breath in, like he hardly expected to be believed. Bethod says any man wants to can go free. That's his word. Fuck his word. Dow sneered at him, and down the walls men jeered and spat their support. Do you think we ain't all seen him break it 10 times before? I done shit's worth more. Lies, of course, chuckled Crummock. But it's traditional, no? To get a bit of line done before we get started on the hard work. You'd feel insulted if he didn't give it some kind of a try at least. Any man, is it? He called down. What about Crummock? I fail. Can he go free? What about the bloody 9? Hansel's face sagged at the name. It's true then. 9 Fingers is up there, is he? Dogman felt Logen come up beside and show himself on the wall. White-Eye turned pale and his shoulders slumped. Well, Dogman heard him saying quiet, "It has to be blood then." Logen leaned lazily on the parapet, and he gave Hansel and his carls a look. That hungry, empty look like he was picking which one of a herd of sheep to slaughter first. You can tell Bethod will come out. He left a pause. Once we've killed the fucking lot of you. A ripple of laughter went down the walls, and men jeered and shook their weapons in the air. Not funny words, particularly, but hard ones, which was what they all needed to hear, Dogman reckoned. Good way to get rid of their fear for a moment. He even managed half a smile himself. White-Eye just stood there in front of their rickety gate, and he waited for the boys to go quiet. I heard you was chief of this crowd now, Dogman, so you don't have to take your orders from this blood-mad butcher no more. That your answer as well? That the way it is? Dogman shrugged. Just what other way did you think it'd be? We didn't come here to talk, Hansel. You can piss off back now. Some more laughter and some more cheers, and one lad down at Shivers' end of the wall pulled his trousers down and stuck his bare arse over the parapet. So that was that for the negotiations. White-Eye shook his head. All right then, I'll tell him. Back to the mud with a lot of you, I reckon, and well earned. You can tell the dead I tried when you meet him. He started picking his way back down the valley, the 4 carls behind him. Logen loomed forward all of a sudden. I'll be looking for your sons, Hansel, he screamed, spit flying out his snarling, grinning mouth and away into the wind. When the work begins, you can tell Bethod I'm waiting. Tell them all I'll be waiting. A strange stillness fell on the wall and the men upon it, on the valley and the men within it. That kind of stillness that comes sometimes before a battle when both sides know what to expect. The same stillness that Logen had felt at Carleon, before he drew his sword and roared for the charge, before he lost his finger, before he was the bloody 9, long ago, when things were simpler. Bethod's ditch was deep enough for him, and the thralls had put away their shovels and moved behind it. The dogman had climbed the steps back to the tower, no doubt taken up his bow beside Grim and Tull, and was waiting. Crummock was behind the wall with his hillmen, lined up fierce and ready. Dow was with his lads on the left. Red Hat was with his boys on the right. Shivers wasn't far from Logen. Both of them stood above the gate, waiting. The standards down in the valley flapped and rustled gently in the wind. A hammer clanged once, twice, 3 times in the fortress behind them. A bird called high above. A man whispered, somewhere, then was still. Logen closed his eyes and tipped his face back, and he felt the hot sun and the cool breeze of the high places on his skin. All as quiet as if he'd been alone, and there were no 10,000 men about him eager to set to killing one another. So still and calm, he almost smiled. Was this what life would have been if he'd never held a blade? For the length of 3 breaths or so, Logen Ninefingers was a man of peace. Then he heard the sound of men moving, and he opened his eyes. Bethod's carls shuffled to the sides of the valley, rank after rank of them, with a crunching of feet and a rattling of gear. They left a rocky path, an open space through their midst. Out of that gap black shapes came, swarming over the ditch like angry ants from a broken nest, boiling up the slope towards the wall in a formless mass of twisted limbs, and snarling mouths and scraping claws. Shanka, and even Logen had never seen half so many in one place. The valley crawled with Thema gibbering, clattering, squawking infestation. By the fucking dead, someone whispered. Logen wondered if he should shout something to the men on the walls around him, if he should cry, steady, or hold. something to help put some heart in his lads the way a leader was meant to. But what would have been the point? Every one of them had fought before and knew his business. Every one of them knew that it was fight or die, and there was no better spur to a man's courage than that. So Logen gritted his teeth, and he curled his fingers tight round the cold grip of the Maker's sword, and he slid the dull metal from its scarred sheath, and he watched the flatheads come. 100 strides away now, maybe, the front runners, and coming on fast. "Ready your bows!" roared Logen. "Bows!" echoed Shivers. "Arrows!" came Dow's harsh scream from down the wall, and Red Hat's bellow from the other side. All around Logen the bows creaked as they were drawn, men taking their aim, jaws clenched, faces grim and dirty. The flatheads came on, heedless, teeth shining, tongues lolling, bitter eyes bright with hate. Soon now, very soon, Logen spun the grip of the sword round in his hand. "Soon," he whispered. "Start fucking shooting then," and the dogman loosed his shaft into the crowd of Shanka. Strings buzzed all round him, and the first volley went hissing down. Arrows missed their marks, bounced off rock and spun away. Arrows found their marks and brought flatheads squealing down in a tangle of black limbs. Men reached for more, calm and solid, the best archers in the whole crew, and knowing it. Bows clicked and shafts twittered, and Shanka died down in the valley, and the archers took aim, nice and easy, loosened them, off and on to the next. Dogman heard the order from down below, and he saw the twitch and flicker of shafts flying from the walls. More flatheads dropped, thrashing and struggling in the dirt. "Easy as squashing ants in a bowl," someone shouted. "Aye," growled the dogman. "Except ants won't climb up out of that bowl and cut your fucking head off. Less talk and more arrows." He watched the first Shanka come up to their fresh-dug ditch, start floundering in, trying to drag the stakes down, scrabbling about at the bottom of the wall. Two heaved a great stone up over his head, leaned out and flung it spinning down with a roar. Dogman saw it crash into a Shanka's head below in the ditch, and dash its brains out, red against the rocks, saw it bounce and tumble into others, send a couple reeling. More fell, screeching as shafts flitted down into them, but there were plenty behind, sliding into the ditch, swarming over each other. They crushed up to the wall, spreading out down its length, a few of them hurling spears up at the men on top, or shooting clumsy arrows. Now they were starting to climb, claws digging into pitted stone, hauling themselves up and up, slow across most of the wall, and getting torn off by rocks and arrows from above. Quicker on the far side, over on the left, furthest from the dogman and his boys, where Black Dow had the watch. Even quicker around the gate, where there was still some ivy stuck to the stone. "Damn it, but those bastards can climb," hissed the dogman, fumbling out his next shaft. "Ah," grunted Grim. The Shanka's hand slapped down on the top of the parapet, a twisted claw scratching at the stones. Logen watched the arm come after, bent and ugly, patched with thick hair and squirming with thick sinew. Now came the flattened top of its bald head, a hulking lump of heavy brow, great jaw yawning wide, sharp teeth slick with spit. The deep-set eyes met his. Logen's sword split its skull down to its flat stub of nose and popped one eye from its socket. Men shot arrows and ducked down as arrows bounced from stone. A spear went twittering past over Logen's head. Down below he could hear the Shanka scratching and tearing at the gates, beating at them with clubs and hammers, could hear them shrieking with rage. Shanka hissed and squawked as they tried to pull themselves over the parapet, and men hacked at them with sword and axe, poked them off the wall with spears. He could hear Shivers roaring, "Get him away from the gate! Away from the gate!" Men bellowed curses. One Carl who'd been leaning out over the parapet fell back, coughing. He had a Shanka's spear through him, just under his shoulder, the point making the shirt stick right up off his back. He blinked down at the warped shaft, opened his mouth to say something. He groaned, took a couple of wobbling steps, and a big flathead started dragging itself over the parapet behind him. Its arms stretched out on the stone. The Maker's sword chopped deep into it just below the elbow, spattering sticky spots across Logen's face. The blade caught stone and made his hand sing, sent him stumbling long enough for the Shanka to drag itself over, its flopping arm only just held on by a flap of skin and sinew. Dark blood drooling out in long spurts. It came for Logen with its other claw, but he caught its wrist, kicked its knee sideways and brought it down. Before it could get up, Head chopped a long gash out of its back, splinters of white bone showing in the great wound. It thrashed and struggled, splattering blood around, and Logen caught it tight under the throat, heaved it back over the wall and flung it off. It fell, and crashed into another just starting to climb. Both of them went sprawling in the ditch, one scrabbling around with a broken stake in its throat. A young lad stood there, gawping, bow hanging limp from his hand. "Did I tell you to stop fucking shooting?" Logen roared at him, and he blinked and knocked a shaft with a trembling hand, hurried back to the parapet. There were men everywhere fighting and shouting, shooting arrows and swinging blades. He saw 3 Carls stabbing at a flathead with their spears. He saw Shivers plant a blow in the small of another's back, blood leaping in the air in dark streaks. He saw a man smash a flathead in the face with his shield, just as it got to the top of the wall, and knock it into the empty air. Logen slashed at Ashanka's hand, slipped in some blood and fell on his side, nearly stabbed himself. He crawled a stride or two and fumbled his way up. He hacked Ashanka's arm off that was already spitted thrashing on a Carl's spear, chopped halfway through another's neck as it showed itself over the parapet. He lurched after it and stared over. One Shanka was still on the wall, and Logen was just pointing to it, when an arrow from off the tower took it in the back. It crashed down into the ditch, stuck on a stake. The ones round the gate were all done, crushed with rocks and bristling with broken arrows. That was it for the center, and Red Hat's side was already clear. Over on the left, there were still a few up on the walls, but Dow's boys were getting well on top of them now. Even as Logen watched, he saw a couple flung down bloody into the ditch. In the valley they started wavering, edging away, squeaking and shrieking, arrows still falling among them from the dogman's archers. Seemed that even Shanka could have enough. They started to turn, to scuttle back towards Bethod's ditch. "We done him!" someone bellowed, and then everyone was cheering and screaming. The boy with the bow was waving it over his head now, grinning like he'd beaten Bethod all by himself. Logen didn't celebrate. He frowned out at the great crowd of Carls beyond the ditch, the standards of Bethod's host flapping over them in the breeze. Brief and bloody, that one might have been, but the next time they came, it was likely to be a lot less brief and a lot more bloody. He made his aching fist uncurl from round the Maker's sword, leaned it up against the parapet, and he pressed one hand with the other to stop them shaking. He took a long breath. "Still alive," he whispered. Logen sat sharpening his knives, the firelight flashing on the blades as he turned them this way and that, stroking them with the whetstone, licking his fingertip and wiping a smudge away, getting them nice and clean. You could never have too many, and that was a fact. He grinned as he remembered what Ferro's answer to that had been. "Unless you fall into a river and drown for all that weight of iron." He wondered for an idle moment if he'd ever see her again, but it didn't look likely. You have to be realistic, after all, and getting through tomorrow seemed like quite the ambition. Grim sat opposite, trimming some straight sticks to use as arrow shafts. There'd still been the slightest glimmer of dusk in the sky when they'd sat down together. Now it was dark as pitch, but for the dusty stars, and neither one of them had said a word the whole time. That was hard and grim for you, and it suited Logen well enough. A comfortable silence was much preferable to a worrisome conversation, but nothing lasts forever. The sound of angry footsteps came out of the darkness, and Black Dow stalked up to the fire, tall and crummock just behind him. He had a frown on his face black enough to have earned his name, and a dirty bandage round his forearm. A long streak of dark blood dried into it. "Pick up a cut, did you?" asked Logen. "Bah!" Dow dropped down beside the fire. "Nothing but a scratch. Fucking flatheads. I'll burn the lot of 'em. How about the rest of you?" Tull grinned. "My palms are terrible chafed from hefting rocks, but I'm a tough bastard. I'll live through it." "And I still find myself miserably idle," said Crummock, "with my children looking to my weapons, and cutting arrows from the dead. Good work for children, that gets 'em comfortable round a corpse. The moon's keen to see me fight, though, so she is, and so am I." Logen sucked at his teeth. "You'll get your chance, Crummock, I'd not worry about that. Bethod's got plenty for everyone, I reckon. I never seen flatheads come on like that." Dow was musing, right at a well-manned wall with no ladders, no tools. "It ain't too clever, your flathead. But it ain't stupid either. They like ambushes. They like cover, and hiding, and creeping around. They can be mad fearless when they have to be, but to come on like that, by choice. Shanka fighting for one set of men against another ain't natural either. These aren't natural times. Might be Bethod's witch has worked some charm to get 'em all stirred up. Cooked herself a chant and a ritual to fill those things with hate of us. Danced naked round a green fire and all the rest, I don't doubt, said Tull. The moon will see us right, my friends, don't worry yourself on that score. Crummock rattled the bones around his neck. The moon loves us all, and we cannot die while there's. Tell it to those as went back to the mud today. Logen jerked his head over towards the fresh-dug graves at the back of the fortress. There was no seeing them in the darkness, but they were there. A score or so long humps of turned and pressed down earth. But the big hillman only smiled. I'd call them the happy ones, though, wouldn't you? At least they all get their own beds, don't they? We'll be lucky if we don't go in pits for a dozen each once the work gets hot. There'll be nowhere for the living to sleep otherwise. Pits for a score. Don't tell me you ain't seen that before, or dug the holes your own sweet self. Logen got up. Maybe I have, but I didn't like it any. Course you did, Crummock roared after him. Don't give me that. Bloody 9. Logen didn't look back. There were torches set on the wall, every 10 paces or so, bright flames in the darkness, white specks of insects floating around them. Men stood in their light, leaning on their spears, bows clenched in their hands, swords drawn, watching the night for surprises. Bethod had always loved surprises, and Logen reckoned they'd have some before they were through. One way or another. He came up to the parapet and set his hands on the clammy stone, frowned down at the fires burning the blackness of the valley, Bethod's fires. Far away in the dark, and their own ones, bonfires built up and lit just below the wall to try and catch any clever bastards trying to sneak up. They cast flickering circles across the shadowy rocks, with here or there the twisted corpse of a flathead, hacked and flung from the wall or stuck with arrows. Logen felt someone move behind him, and his back prickled. Eyes sliding to the corners. Shivers, maybe, come to settle their score and shove him off the wall. Shivers or one of 100 others with some grudge that Logen had forgotten, but they never would. He made sure his hand was close to a blade, and he bared his teeth, and he made ready to spin and strike. We did good today, though, eh? Said the dogman. Lost less than 20. Logen breathed easy again, and he let his hand drop. We did all right. But Bethod's just getting started. He's prodding to see where we're weakest, see if he can wear us down. He knows that time's the thing, most valuable thing there is in war. A day or two's worth more to him than a load of flatheads. If he can crush us quick, he'll take the losses, I reckon. Best thing might be to hold out then, eh? Off in the darkness, far away and echoing, Logen could just hear the clang and clatter of smithing and carpentry. They're building down there. All the stuff they'll need to climb our wall, fill in our ditch, lots of ladders and all the rest. He'll take us quick if he can be, thawed, but... Dogman nodded. Well, like I said, best thing to do would be to hold out. If all goes to plan, the Union will be here soon. They'd better be. Plans have a way of coming apart when you lean on 'em, ma'am. Chapter 22. Such sweet sorrow. His Resplendence, the Grand Duke of Austria, desires only the best of relations. Jezal could do little but sit and smile, as he had been sitting and smiling all the whole interminable day. His face and his rump were aching from it. The burbling of the ambassador continued unabated, accompanied by flamboyant hand gestures. Occasionally he would dam the river of blather for a moment, so that his translator could render his platitudes into the common tongue. He need scarcely have bothered. The great city of Austria was always honored to count herself among the closest friends of your illustrious father, King Guslav, and now seeks nothing more than the continuing friendship of the government and people of the Union. Jezal had sat and smiled through the long morning, in his bejeweled chair, on his high marble dais, as the ambassadors of the world came to pay their ingratiating respects. He had sat as the sun rose in the sky and poured mercilessly through the vast windows, glinting on the gilt moldings that encrusted every inch of wall and ceiling, flashing from the great mirrors, and silver candlesticks, and grand vases, striking multicolored fire from the tinkling glass beads on the 3 monstrous chandeliers. The Grand Duke wishes once again to express his brotherly regret at the minor incident last spring, and assures you that nothing of the kind will happen again, provided the soldiers of Westport stay on their side of the border. He had sat through the border, endless afternoon as the room grew hotter and hotter, squirming as the representatives of the world's great leaders bowed in and scraped out with identical bland congratulations in a dozen different languages. He had sat as the sun went down, and hundreds of candles were lit and hoisted up, twinkling at him from the mirrors and the darkened windows and the highly polished floor. He sat, smiling, and receiving praise from men whose countries he had scarcely even heard of before that endless day began. His resplendence furthermore hopes and trusts that the hostilities between your great nation and the empire of Gurkul may soon come to an end, and that trade may once more flow freely around the Circle Sea. Both ambassador and translator paused politely for a rare instant, and Jezal managed to stir himself into sluggish speech. "We have a similar hope. Please convey to the Grand Duke our thanks for the wonderful gift." Two lackeys, meanwhile, heaved the huge chest to one side and placed it with the rest of the gaudy rubbish Jezal had accumulated that day. Further Styrian chatter flowed out into the room. "His Resplendence wishes to convey his heartfelt congratulations on your August Majesty's forthcoming marriage to the Princess Therese, the Jewel of Talons, surely the greatest beauty alive in all the wide circle of the world." Jezal could only fight to maintain his stretched grin. He had heard the match spoken of as a settled thing so often that day that he had lost the will to correct the misconception, and had in fact almost started to think of himself as engaged. All he cared about was that the audiences should finally be finished with, so he might steal a moment to drown himself in peace. "His Resplendence has further instructed us to wish your August Majesty a long and happy reign," explained the translator, "and many heirs, that your line may continue undiminished in glory." Jezal forced his smile a tooth wider and inclined his head. "I bid you good evening." The Austrian ambassador bowed with a theatrical flourish, sweeping off his enormous hat, its multicolored feathers thrashing with enthusiasm. Then he shuffled backwards, still bent over, across the gleaming floor. He somehow made it out into the corridor without pitching over on his back, and the great doors, festooned with gold leaf, were smoothly shut upon him. Jezal snatched the crown from his head and tossed it onto the cushion beside the throne, rubbing at the chafe marks round his sweaty scalp with one hand, while he tugged his embroidered collar open with the other. Nothing helped. He still felt dizzy, weak, oppressively hot. Hoff was already ingratiating himself onto Jezal's left side. "That was the last of the ambassadors, Your Majesty. Tomorrow will be occupied by the nobility of Midderland. They are eager to pay homage. Lots of homage and little help, I'll be bound." Hoff managed a chuckle of suffocating falseness. "Ha ha ha ha, Your Majesty. They have sought audiences from dawn, and we would not wish to offend them by—" "Damn it," hissed Jezal, jumping up and shaking his legs in a vain effort to unstick his trousers from his sweaty backside. He jerked his crimson sash over his head and flung it away, tore his gilded frock coat open, and tried to rip it off. But in the end he got his hand caught in one cuff and had to turn the bloody thing inside out before he could finally get free of it. "Damn it!" He hurled it down on the marble dais with half a mind to stamp it to rags. Then he remembered himself. Hoff had taken a cautious step back, and was frowning as if he had discovered his fine new mansion was afflicted with a terrible case of rot. The assorted servants, pages, and knights, both herald and of the body, were all staring studiously ahead, doing their best to imitate statues. Over in the dark corner of the room, Bayaz was standing. His eyes were sunk in shadow, but his face was stony grim. Jezal blushed like a naughty schoolboy called to account, and pressed one hand over his eyes. A terribly trying day. He hurried down the steps of the dais and out of the audience chamber with his head down. The blaring of a belated and slightly off-key fanfare pursued him down the hallway. So unfortunately did the first of the Magi. "That was not gracious," said Bayaz. "Rare rages render a man frightening. Common ones render him ridiculous." "I apologize," growled Jezal through gritted teeth. "The crown is a mighty burden and a mighty honor both. We had a discussion, as I recall, about your striving to be worthy of it." The Magus left a significant pause. "Perhaps you might strive harder." Jezal rubbed at his aching temples. "I just need a moment to myself is all. Just a moment, take all the time you need. But we have business in the morning, Your Majesty, business we cannot avoid. The nobility of Midderland will not wait to congratulate you. I will see you at dawn, brimful with energy and enthusiasm, I am sure." Yes, yes, Jezal snapped over his shoulder. Brimful! He burst out into a small courtyard, surrounded on three sides by a shadowy colonnade, and stood still in the cool evening. He shook himself, squeezed his eyes shut, let his head tip back and took a long, slow breath. A minute alone. He wondered if, aside from pissing or sleeping, it was the first he had been permitted since that day of madness in the Lord's Round. He was the victim, or perhaps the beneficiary, of the most almighty blunder. Somehow, everyone had mistaken him for a king, when he was very clearly a selfish, clueless idiot who had scarcely in his life thought more than a day ahead. Every time someone called him, Your Majesty, he felt more of a fraud, and with each moment that passed he was more guiltily surprised not to have been found out. He wandered across the perfect lawn, giving vent to a long, self-pitying sigh. It caught in his throat. There was a knight of the body beside a doorway opposite, standing to attention so rigidly that Jezal had hardly noticed him. He cursed under his breath. Could he not be left alone for 5 minutes together? He frowned as he walked closer. The man seemed somehow familiar. A great big fellow with a shaved head and a noticeable lack of neck. Bremer Dan Gorst. Your Majesty, said Gorst, his armor rattling as he clashed his meaty fist against his polished breastplate. It is a pleasure to see you. Jezal had disliked the man from the first moment he had laid eyes on him, and being bludgeoned round a fencing circle by him, whether Jezal had won in the end or no, had not improved his opinion of the necklace brute. Now, however, anything resembling a familiar face was like a glass of water in the desert. Jezal actually found himself reaching out and squeezing the man's heavy hand as though they were old friends, and had to make himself let go of it. Your Majesty does me too much honor. Please, you need not call me that. How did you come to be part of the household? I thought that you served with Lord Brock's guard. That post did not suit me, said Gorst in his strangely high piping voice. I was lucky enough to find a place with the Knights of the Body some months ago, Your Ma. He cut himself off. An idea slunk into Jezal's head. He looked over his shoulder, but there was no one else nearby. The garden was still as a graveyard, its shadowy arcades as quiet as crypts. Bremer, I may call you Bremer, may I? I suppose that my king may call me whatever he wishes. I wonder, could I ask you for a favor? Gorst blinked. Your Majesty has only to ask. Jezal spun around as he heard the door open. Gorst stepped out into the colonnade with the soft jingle of armor. A cloaked and hooded figure followed him, silently. The old excitement was still there as she pushed back her hood, and a chink of light from a window above crept across the lower part of her face. He could see the bright curve of her cheek, one side of her mouth, the outline of a nostril, the gleam of her eyes in the shadows, and that was all. Thank you, Gorst, said Jezal. You may leave us. The big man thumped his chest and backed through the archway, pulling the door to behind him. Hardly the first time they had met in secret, of course, but things were different now. He wondered if it would end with kisses and soft words between them, or if it would simply end. The start was far from promising. Your August Majesty, said R.D. with the very heaviest of irony. What a towering honor! Should I grovel on my face, or do I curtsy? However hard her words, the sound of her voice still made the breath catch in his throat. Curtsy, he managed to say. Do you even know how? In truth, not really. I have not had the training for polite society, and now the lack of it quite crushes me. She stepped forward, frowning into the darkened garden. When I was a girl, in my wildest flights of fancy, I used to dream of being invited to the palace, a guest of the king himself. We would eat fine cakes and drink fine wine, and talk fine talk of important things deep into the night. Ade pressed her hands to her chest and fluttered her eyelashes. Thank you for making the pitiful dreams of one poor wretch come true. If only for the briefest moment. The other beggars will never believe me when I tell them. We are all more than a little shocked by the turn events have taken. Oh, we are indeed, Your Majesty, Jezal flinched. Don't call me that. Not you. What should I call you? My name, Jezal, that is. The way you used to please. If I must. You promised me, Jezal. You promised me you would not let me down. I know I did, and I meant to keep my promise, but the fact is, king or not. He fumbled with the words as much as he ever had. then blurted them out in an idiotic spurt. "I cannot marry you!" "I surely would have done had not." He raised his arms and hopelessly let them drop. "Had not all this happened, but it has happened, and there is nothing that I can do. I cannot marry you. Of course not." Her mouth gave a bitter twist. "Promises are for children. I never thought it very likely, even before. Even in my most unrealistic moments. Now the notion seems ridiculous. The king and the peasant girl. Absurd. The most hackneyed storybook would never dare suggest it. It need not mean that we never see each other again." He took a hesitant step towards her. "Things will be different, of course, but we can still find moments." He reached out, slowly, awkwardly. "Moments when we can be together." He touched her face, gently, and felt the same guilty thrill he always had. "We can be to each other just as we were. You would not need to worry. Everything would be taken care of." She looked him in the eye. "So you'd like me to be your whore?" He jerked his hand back. "No, of course not. I mean, I would like you to be." What did he mean? He fumbled desperately for a better word. "My lover? Ah, I see. And when you take a wife, what will I be, then? What will I be think your queen might use to describe me?" Jezal swallowed, and looked at his shoes. "A whore is still a whore, whatever word you use. Easily tired of, and even more easily replaced. And when you tire of me and you find other lovers, what will they call me then?" She gave a bitter snort. "I'm scum, and I know it, but you must think even less of me than I do. It's not my fault." He felt tears in his eyes. Pain or relief, it was hard to tell. A bitter alloy of both, perhaps. "It's not my fault. Of course it isn't. I don't blame you. I blame myself. I used to think I had bad luck, but my brother was right. I make bad choices." She looked at him with that same judging expression in her dark eyes that she had when they first met. "I could have found a good man, but I chose you. I should have known better." She reached up and touched his face, rubbed a tear from his cheek with her thumb, just as she had when they parted before, in the park, in the rain. But then there had been the hope that they would meet again. Now there was none. She sighed and let her arm drop, and stared sulkily out into the garden. Jezal blinked. Could that really be all? He yearned to say some last tender word, at least some bittersweet farewell. But his mind was empty. What words could there possibly be that could make any difference? They were done, and more talk would only have been salt in the cuts. Wasted breath. He set his jaw, and wiped the last damp streaks from his face. She was right. The king and the peasant girl. What could have been more ridiculous? "Gorst!" he barked. The door squealed open, and the muscle-bound guardsman emerged from the shadows, his head humbly bowed. "You may escort the lady back to her home." He nodded, and stood away from the dark archway. Artie turned and walked towards it, pulling up her hood, and Jezal watched her go. He wondered if she would pause on the threshold and look back, and their eyes would meet, and there would be one last moment between them, one last catching of his breath, one last tugging at his heart. But she did not look back. Without the slightest pause, she stepped through and was gone, and Gorst after her, and Jezal was left in the moonlit garden, alone. Chapter 23. Picked up a shadow. Ferro sat on the warehouse roof, her eyes narrowed against the bright sun, her legs crossed underneath her. She watched the boats, and the people flowing off them. She watched for Yulwei. That was why she came here every day. There was war between the Union and Gurkal, a meaningless war with a lot of talk and no fighting, and so no ships went to Kanta. But Yulwei went where he pleased. He could take her back to the south, so she could have her vengeance on the Gurkish. Until he came, she was trapped with the Pinks. She ground her teeth, and clenched her fists, and grimaced at her own uselessness, her boredom, her wasted time. She would have prayed to God for Yulwei to come, but God never listened. Jezal Dan Luther, fool that he was, for reasons she could not comprehend, had been given a crown and made king. Bayaz, who Ferro was sure had been behind the whole business, now spent every hour with him, still trying to make him a leader of men, no doubt. Just as he had all the long way across the plain and back, with small results. Jezal Dan Luther, the king of the Union. Nine Fingers would have laughed long and hard at that if he could have heard it. Ferro smiled to think of him laughing. Then she realized that she was smiling, and made herself stop. Bayaz had promised her vengeance, and given her nothing, and left her mired here, powerless. There was nothing to smile at. She sat and watched the boats for Yue. She did not watch for Nine Fingers. She did not hope to see him slouch onto the docks. That would have been a foolish, childish hope, belonging to the foolish child she had been when the Gurkish took her for a slave. He would not change his mind and come back. She had made sure of it. Strange, though, how she kept thinking that she saw him, in amongst the crowds. The dockers had come to recognize her. They had shouted at her, for a while. "Come down here, my lovely, and give me a kiss," one of them had called, and his friends had laughed. And Ferro had thrown half a brick at his head and knocked him in the sea. He had nothing to say to her once they fished him out. None of them had, and that suited her well enough. She sat and watched the boats. She sat until the sun was low, casting a bright glare across the bottoms of the clouds, making the shifting waves sparkle, until the crowds thinned out and the cart stopped moving, and the shouting and bustle of the docks faded to a dusty quiet, until the breeze grew cool against her skin. Yulvai was not coming today. She climbed down from the roof of the warehouse and worked her way through the back streets towards the middle way. It was as she was walking down that wide road, scowling at the people who passed her, that she realized she was being followed. He did it well and carefully, sometimes closer, sometimes further back, staying out of plain sight but never hiding. She took a few turns to make sure, and he always followed. He was dressed all in black, with long, lank hair, and a mask covering part of his face. All in black, like a shadow, like the men that had chased her and Nine Fingers before they left for the old empire. She watched him out of the corners of her eyes, never looking straight at him, never letting him know that she knew. He would find out soon enough. She took a turn down a dingy alley, stopped, and waited behind the corner, pressed up against the grimy stonework, holding her breath. Her bow and her sword might be far away, but shock was the only weapon she needed. That, and her hands, and her feet, and her teeth. She heard the footsteps coming, careful footsteps, padding down the alley so soft she could barely hear them. She found that she was smiling. It felt good to have an enemy, to have a purpose. Very good, after so long without one. It filled the empty space inside her, even if it was only for a moment. She gritted her teeth, feeling the fury swelling up in her chest. Hot and exciting, safe and familiar. Like the kiss of an old lover, much missed. When he rounded the corner, her fist was already swinging. It crunched into his mask and sent him reeling. She pressed in close, cracking him in the face with each hand and knocking his head right and left. He fumbled for a knife, but he was slow and dizzy, and the blade was barely out of its sheath before she had his wrist tight. Her elbow snapped his head back, jabbed into his throat and left him gurgling. She tore the knife out of his limp hand, spun around and kicked him in the gut, so he bent over. Her knee thudded into his mask and sent him onto his back in the dirt. She followed him down, her legs wrapping tight around his waist, her arm across his chest, his own knife pressed up against his throat. "Look at this," she whispered in his face. "I have picked up a shadow." "Glok," came from behind his mask, his eyes still rolling. "Hard to talk with that on, eh?" And she slashed the straps of his mask with a jerk of the knife, the blade leaving a long scratch down his cheek. He did not look so dangerous without it, much younger than she had thought, with a rash of spots around his chin and a growth of downy hair on his top lip. He jerked his head, and his eyes came back into focus. He snarled, tried to twist free, but she had him fast, and a touch of the knife against his neck soon calmed him. "Why are you following me? I'm not fucking Ferro," had never been a patient woman. Straddling her shadow as she was, it was an easy thing to rear up and smash her elbow into his face. He did his best to ward her off, but all her weight was on his hips, and he was helpless. Her arm crashed through his hands and into his mouth, his nose, his cheek, cracking his head back against the greasy cobbles. 4 of those, and the fight was out of him. His head lolled back, and she crouched down over him again and tucked the knife up under his neck. Blood bubbled out of his nose and his mouth, and ran down the side of his face in dark streaks. "Following me now. I just watch." His voice clicked in his bloody mouth. I just watch. I don't give the orders. The Gurkish soldiers did not give the orders to kill Ferro's people and make her a slave. That did not make them innocent. That did not make them safe from her. He coughed, and his face twitched. Bubbles of blood blew out of his swollen nostrils. Nothing else. Ferro frowned. What? She moved the knife down and pricked at his thigh with the point. You think I never cut a cock off before, Glokta, he mumbled, closing his eyes. I work for Glokta. Glokta. The name meant nothing to her, but it was something to follow. She slid the knife back up to his neck. The lump on his throat rose and fell, brushing against the edge of the blade. She clenched her jaw and worked her fingers round the grip. Frowning down, tears had started to glitter in the corners of his eyes. Best to get it done, and away. Safest. But her hand was hard to move. Give me a reason not to do it. The tears welled up and ran down the sides of his bloody face. My birds, he whispered. Birds. There will be no one to feed them. I deserve it, sure enough, but my birds, they've done nothing. She narrowed her eyes at him. Birds. Strange, the things that people have to live for. Her father had kept a bird, she remembered it, in a cage, hanging from a pole. A useless thing that could not even fly, only cling to a twig. He had taught it words. She remembered watching him feeding it when she was a child. Long ago, before the Gurkish came. SS, she hissed in his face, pressing the knife up against his neck and making him cower. Then she pulled the blade away, got up, and stood over him. The moment when I see you again will be your last. Back to your birds, Shadow. He nodded, his wet eyes wide, and she turned and stalked off down the dark alleyway into the dusk. When she crossed a bridge, she tossed the knife away. It vanished with a splash, and ripples spread out in growing circles across the slimy water. A mistake, most likely. To have left that man alive. Mercy was always a mistake in her experience. But it seemed she was in a merciful mood today. Chapter 24. Questions. Colonel Glokta was a magnificent dancer, of course, but with his leg feeling as stiff as it did, it was difficult for him to truly shine. The constant buzzing of flies was a further distraction, and his partner was not helping. Ade West looked well enough, but her constant giggling was becoming quite the irritation. Stop that, snapped the colonel, whirling her around the laboratory of the Adeptus Physical, the specimens in the jars pulsing and wobbling in time to the music. Partially eaten, Kondalau grinned, one eye enormously magnified through his eyeglass. He pointed downwards with his tongs. This is a foot. Glokta pushed the bushes aside, one hand pressed over his face. The butchered corpse lay there, glistening red, scarcely recognizable as human. Ardi laughed and laughed at the sight of it. Partially eaten, she tittered at him. Colonel Glokta did not find the business in any way amusing. The sound of flies was growing louder and louder, threatening to drown out the music entirely. Worse yet, it was getting terribly cold in the park. Careless of me, said a voice from behind. How do you mean? Just to leave it there. But sometimes it is better to move quickly than to move carefully. Cripple. I remember this, murmured Glokta. It had grown colder yet, and he was shivering like a leaf. I remember this. Of course, whispered the voice. A woman's voice, but not Ardi. A low and hissing voice that made his eye twitch. What can I do? The colonel could feel his gorge rising. The wounds in the red meat yawned. The flies were so loud he could hardly hear the reply. Perhaps you should go to the university and ask for advice. Icy breath brushed his neck and made his back shiver. Perhaps while you are there, you could ask them about the seed. Glokta lurched to the bottom of the steps and staggered sideways, falling back against the wall, the breath hissing over his wet tongue. His left leg trembled. His left eye twitched, as though the two were connected by a cord of pain that cut into his arse, guts, back, shoulder, neck, face, and tightened with every movement, however small. He forced himself to be still, to breathe long and slow. He made his mind move off the pain and on to other things, like Bayaz and his failed quest for this seed. After all, His Eminence is waiting, and is not known for his patience. He stretched his neck out to either side and felt the bones clicking between his twisted shoulder blades. He pressed his tongue into his gums and shuffled away from the steps, into the cool darkness of the stacks. They had not changed much in the past year, or probably in a few centuries before that. The vaulted spaces smelled of fust and age, lit only by a couple of flickering, grimy lamps, sagging shelves stretching away into the shifting shadows. Time to go digging once again through the dusty refuse of history. The Adeptus Historical did not appear to have changed much either. He sat at his stained desk, poring over a moldy-looking pile of papers in the light from a single squirming candle flame. He squinted up as Glokta hobbled closer. "Who's there?" "Glokta." He peered up suspiciously towards the shadowy ceiling. "What happened to your crow?" "Dead," grunted the ancient librarian sadly. "History, you might say." The old man did not laugh. "Ah, well, it happens to us all, and some sooner than others. I have questions for you." The Adeptus Historical craned forward over his desk, peering dourly up at Glokta as though he had never seen another human before. "I remember you. Miracles do happen then. You asked me about Bayaz, first apprentice of great Juvens, first letter in the alphabet of the Yeas. Yes, we've been over this." The old man gave a sulky frown. "Did you bring that scroll back? The maker fell burning, and so on?" "I'm afraid not. The Archlector has it." "Gah! I hear far too much about that man these days. Them upstairs are always carping on him. His Eminence this and His Eminence that. I'm sick of hearing it. I know very much how you feel. Everyone's in a spin these days. A spin and a ruckus. Lots of changes upstairs. We have a new king." "I know that. Guslav, is it?" Glokta gave a long sigh as he settled himself in the chair on the other side of the desk. Yes, he's the one. Only 30 years out of date or so. I'm surprised he didn't think Herod the Great was still on the throne. What do you want this time? Oh, to fumble in the darkness for answers that are always just out of reach. I want to know about the seed. The lined face did not move. The what? It was mentioned in your precious scroll? That thing that Bayaz and his magical friends searched for in the house of the Maker? After the death of Canidius? After the death of Juvens? Bah! The Adeptus waved his hand, the saggy flesh under his wrist wobbling. Secret's power. It's all a metaphor. Bayaz does not seem to think so. Glokta shuffled his chair closer and spoke lower. Though there cannot be anyone to hear, or to care if they did. I heard it was a piece of the other side, left over from the old time, when devils walked our earth. The stuff of magic made solid. The old man wheezed with papery laughter, displaying a rotten cavern of a mouth with fewer teeth even than Glokta's own. I did not take you for a superstitious man, Superior. Nor was I one when I last came here with questions, before my visit to the house of the Maker, before my meeting with Yulwe, before I saw Shickle smile while they burned her. What happy times they were before I had heard of Bayaz, when things still made sense. The Adeptus wiped his runny eyes with his palsied mockery of a hand. Where did you hear that? Oh, from a navigator with his foot on an anvil. Never you mind from where. Well, you know more about it than me. I read once that rocks sometimes fall out of the sky. Some say they are fragments of the stars. Some say they are splinters, flung out from the chaos of hell. Dangerous to touch, terribly cold. Cold! Glokta could almost feel that icy breath upon his neck, and he wriggled his shoulders at it, forcing himself not to glance behind him. Tell me about hell, though I think I already know more than most on the subject. Hell, old man. The other side. They say it is where magic comes from, if you believe in such things. I have learned to keep an open mind on the subject. An open mind is like to an open wound, apt to, so I have heard. But we are speaking of hell. The librarian licked at his sagging lips. Legend has it that there was a time when our world and the world below were one, and devils roamed the earth. Great Uez cast them out, and spoke the first law forbidding all to touch the other side, or to speak to devils, or to tamper with the gates between. The first law, His son Glustrod, hungry for power, ignored his father's warnings, and he sought out secrets, and summoned devils, and sent them against his enemies. It is said his folly led to the destruction of Alcus and the fall of the old empire, and that when he destroyed himself, he left the gates ajar, but I am not the expert on all that. Who is? The old man grimaced. There were books here, very old, beautiful books from the time of the Mastermaker, books on the subject of the other side, the divide between, the gates and the locks, books on the subject of the tellers of secrets, and of their summoning and sending. A load of invention, if you ask me. Myth and fantasy. There were books. They have been missing from my shelves for some years now. Missing? Where are they? The old man frowned. Strange that you of all people should ask that. Enough! Glokta turned as quickly as he could to look behind him. Silber, the university administrator, stood at the foot of the steps, with a look of the strangest horror and surprise on his rigid face. Quite as if he had seen a ghost, or even a demon. That will be quite enough, Superior. We thank you for your visit. Enough? Glokta gave a frown of his own. His Eminence will not be. I know what His Eminence will or will not be, an unpleasantly familiar voice. Superior Goyle worked his way slowly down the steps. He strolled around Silber across the shadowy floor between the shelves. And I say enough. We most heartily thank you for your visit. He leaned forwards, eyes popping furiously from his head. Make it your last. Make it your last! There had been some startling changes in the dining hall since Glokta went downstairs. The evening had grown dark outside the dirty windows. The candles had been lit in their tarnished sconces. And, of course, there is the matter of 24 widely assorted practicals of the Inquisition. 2 narrow-eyed natives of Soljuk sat staring at Glokta over their masks, as like as if they had been twins, their black boots up on the ancient dining table, 4 curved swords lying sheathed on the wood before them. 3 dark-skinned men stood near one dark window, heads shaved, each with an axe at his belt and a shield on his back. A great tall practical loomed up by the fireplace, long and thin as a birch tree with blonde hair hanging over his masked face. Beside was a short one, almost dwarfish, his belt bristling with knives. Glokta recognized the huge Northman called the Stone Splitter from his previous visit to the university, but it looks as if he has been attempting to split stones with his face since we last met, and with great persistence. His cheeks were uneven, his brows were wonky, the bridge of his nose pointed sharply to the left. His ruin of a face was almost as disturbing as the enormous mallet he had clenched in his massive fists. But not quite. So it went on, as strange and worrying a collection of murderers as could ever have been collected together in one place, and all heavily armed. And it seems that Superior Goyle has restocked his freak show. In the midst of them, and seeming quite at home, stood practical Vitari, pointing this way and that, giving orders. You would never have thought she was the mothering type. Seeing her now, but I suppose we all have our hidden talents. Glokta threw his right arm up in the air. Who are we killing? All eyes turned towards him. Vitari stalked over, a frown across the freckled bridge of her nose. What the hell are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. If you know what's good for you, you'll ask no questions at all. Glokta leered his empty smile at her. If I knew what was good for me, I'd never have lost my teeth. And questions are all I have left. What's in this old pile of dust that's of interest to you? That's none of my business, and even less of yours. If you're looking for traitors, maybe you should look in your own house first, eh? And what is that supposed to mean? Vitari leaned close to him and whispered through her mask. You saved my life, so let me return the favor. Get away from here. Get away, and keep away. Glokta shuffled down the passageway and up to his heavy door. As far as Bayaz goes, we are no further on. Nothing that will bring a rare smile to the face of His Eminence. Summonings and sendings, gods and devils, always more questions. He turned his key impatiently in the lock, desperate to sit down and take the weight from his trembling leg. What was Goyle doing at the university? Goyle and Vitari and 24 practicals, all armed as if they were going to war. He took a wincing step over the threshold. There must be some... Gah! He felt his cane snatched away, and he lurched sideways, clutching at the air. Something crunched into his face and filled his head with blinding pain. The next moment the floor thumped him in the back and drove his wind out in a long sigh. He blinked and slobbered, mouth salty with blood, the dark room swaying madly around him. Oh dear, Oh dear. A fist in the face, unless I am much mistaken. It never loses its impact. A hand grabbed the collar of his coat and dragged him up, the cloth cutting into his throat and making him squawk like a strangled chicken. Another had him by the belt, and he was hauled bodily along, his knees and the toes of his boots scraping limp over the boards. He struggled weakly on a reflex, but only managed to send a stab of pain through his own back. The bathroom door cracked against his head and banged open on the wall. He was dragged powerless across the darkened room towards the bath, still full of dirty water from that morning. "Wait," he croaked as he was wrestled over the edge. "Who are Blur?" The cold water closed around his head, the bubbles rushed around his face. He was held there, struggling, eyes bulging open with shock and panic, until it seemed his lungs would burst. Then he was yanked up by the hair, water pouring from his face and splattering into the bath. A simple technique, but undeniably effective. "I am greatly discomfited." He took in a gasping breath. "What do you blah?" Back into the darkness, such air as he had managed to drag in gurgling out into the dirty water. "But whoever it is, let me breathe. I am not being murdered. I am being softened up. Softened up for question." I would laugh at the irony were there any breath left in my body. He shoved at the bath and thrashed at the water. His legs kicked pointlessly, but the hand on the back of his neck was made of steel. His stomach clenched and his ribs heaved, desperate to drag in air. "Do not breathe, do not breathe, do not breathe." He was just sucking in a great lungful of dirty water as he was snatched up from the bath and flung onto the boards, coughing, gasping, vomiting all at once. "You are Glokta?" A woman's voice, short and hard with a rough Celtic accent. She squatted down in front of him, balanced on the balls of her feet, her wrists resting on her knees, her long brown hands hanging limp. She wore a man's shirt, loose around her scrawny shoulders, wet sleeves rolled up around her bony wrists. Her black hair was hacked off short and stuck from her head in greasy clumps. She had a thin, pale scar down her hard face, a scowl on her thin lips. But it was her eyes that were most off-putting, gleaming yellow in the half-light from the corridor. Small wonder that Severard was reluctant to follow her. I should have listened to him. "You are Glokta?" There was no point denying it. He wiped the bitter drool from his chin with a shaking hand. "I am Glokta. Why are you watching me?" He pushed himself painfully up to sitting. "What makes you think I will have anything to say?" Her fist struck him on the point of his chin and snapped his head back, tore a gasp out of him. His jaws banged together and one tooth punched a hole in the bottom of his tongue. He sagged back against the wall, the dark room lurching, his eyes filling up with tears. When things came back into focus, she was staring at him, yellow eyes narrowed. "I will keep hitting you until you give me answers, or you die." "My thanks, thanks, thanks. I think you might have loosened my neck up just a fraction." Glokta smiled, showing her his few bloody teeth. "For 2 years I was a captive of the Gurkish. 2 years in the darkness of the Emperor's prisons. 2 years of cutting and chiseling and burning. Do you think the thought of a slap or two scares me?" He chuckled bloody laughter in her face. "It hurts more when I piss. Do you think I'm scared to die?" He grimaced at the stabbing through his spine as he leaned towards her. "Every morning that I wake up alive is a disappointment. If you want answers, you'll have to give me answers, like for like." She stared at him for a long moment, not blinking. "You were a prisoner of the Gurkish." Glokta swept a hand over his twisted body. "They gave me all this. Huh. We have both lost something to the Gurkish then." She slid down onto crossed legs. "Questions, like for like. But if you try to lie to me, questions, then I would be failing in my duties as a host if I did not allow you to go first." She did not smile, but then she does not seem the joking type. "Why are you watching me? I could lie, but for what? I might as well die telling the truth. I am watching Bayaz. The two of you seem friendly, and Bayaz is hard to watch these days, so I am watching you." She scowled. "He is no friend of mine. He promised me vengeance, that is all. He has yet to deliver. Life is full of disappointments. Life is made of disappointments. Ask your question, cripple." Once she has her answers, will it be bath time again? And this time my last. Her flat yellow eyes gave nothing away. Empty, like the eyes of an animal. But what are my choices? He licked the blood from his lips and leaned back against the wall. I might as well die a little wiser. What is the sea? Her frown deepened by the smallest fraction. Bayaz said it is a weapon of very great power, great enough to turn Shafa to dust. He thought it was hidden, at the edge of the world, but he was wrong. He was not happy to be wrong. She frowned at him for a silent moment. Why are you watching Bayaz? Because he stole the crown and put it on a spineless worm, she snorted. There at least we can agree. There are those in my government who worry about the direction in which he might take us. Who worry profoundly. Glokta licked at one bloody tooth. Where is he taking us? He tells me nothing. I do not trust him, and he does not trust me. There too we can agree. He planned to use the seed as a weapon. He did not find it, so he must find other weapons. My guess is he is taking you to war. A war against Khalul and his eaters. Glokta felt a flurry of twitches run up the side of his face and set his eyelid fluttering. Damn treacherous jelly! Her head jerked to the side. You know of them? A passing acquaintance. Well, where's the harm? I caught one. In Dagoska, I asked it questions. What did it tell you? It talked of righteousness and justice. Two things that I have never seen. It talked of war and sacrifice. Two things that I have seen too much of. It said that your friend Bayaz killed his own master. The woman did not move so much as an eyelash. It said that its father, the prophet Khalul, still seeks vengeance. Vengeance, she hissed, her hands bunching into fists. I will show them vengeance. What did they do to you? They killed my people. She uncrossed her legs. They made me a slave. She rose smoothly to her feet, looming over him. They stole my life from me. Glokta felt the corner of his mouth twitch up. One more thing we have in common, and I sense my borrowed time is up. She reached down and grabbed two fistfuls of his wet coat. She dragged him from the floor with fearsome strength, his back sliding up the wall, body found floating in the bath. He felt his nostrils opening wide, the air hissing fast in his bloody nose, his heart thumping in anticipation. No doubt my ruined body will struggle, as best it can. An irresistible reaction to the lack of air, the unconquerable instinct to breathe. No doubt I will thrash and wriggle, just as Tulkis, the Gurkish ambassador, thrashed and wriggled when they hanged him, and dragged his guts out for nothing. He did his twisted best to stay up under his own power, to stand as close to straight as he could manage. After all, I was a proud man once, even if that is all far behind me. Hardly the end that Colonel Glokta would have hoped for. Drowned in the bath by a woman in a dirty shirt. Will they find me slumped over the rim, my arse in the air? But what does it matter? It is not how you die, but how you lived that counts. She let go of his coat, flattened the front with a slap of her hand. And what has my life been these past years? What do I have that I might truly miss? Stairs? Soup? Pain? Lying in the darkness with the memories of the things I have done digging at me. Waking in the morning to the stink of my own shit. Will I miss tea with R.D. West? A little, perhaps. But will I miss tea with the Archlector? It almost makes you wonder why I didn't do it myself, years ago. He stared into his killer's eyes, as hard and bright as yellow glass, and he smiled. A smile of the purest relief. I am ready. For what? She pressed something into his limp hand. The handle of his cane. If you have more business with Bayaz, leave me out of it. I will not be so gentle next time. She backed slowly towards the doorway, a bright rectangle against the shadowy wall. She turned, and the sound of her boots receded down the corridor. Aside from the soft tip-tap of water dripping from his wet coat, all fell silent. And so, it seems, I survive. Again. Glokta raised his eyebrows. Perhaps the trick is not wanting to. Chapter 25, the fourth day. He was an ugly bastard, this Easterner. A huge big one, dressed all in stinking, half-tanned furs, and a bit of rusted chainmail, more ornament than protection. Greasy black hair, bound up here and there with rough-edged silver rings, dripped with the thin rain. He had a great scar down one cheek, and another across his forehead, and the countless nicks and pittings of lesser wounds and boils as a lad, nose flattened and bent sideways like a dented spoon. His eyes were screwed up, tight with effort. His yellow teeth were bared, the front two missing, his grey tongue pressed into the gap. A face that had seen war all its days, a face that had lived by sword and axe and spear and counted every day alive a bonus. For Logen, it was almost like looking in a mirror. They held each other as tight as a pair of bad lovers, blind to everything around them. They lumbered back and forward, lurching like feuding drunkards. They plucked and tugged, bit and gouged, gripped and tore, strained in frozen fury, blasting sour breath in each other's faces, an ugly and a wearying and a fatal dance, and all the while the rain came down. Logen took a painful dig in the gut and had to twist and wriggle to smother a second. He gave a half-hearted headbutt and did nothing more than scuff Ugly's face with his forehead. He nearly got tripped, stumbled, felt the Easterner shift his weight, trying to find a set to throw him. Logen managed to dig him in the fruits with his thigh before he could do it, enough to make his arms go weak for a moment, enough so he could slide his hand up onto Ugly's neck. Logen forced that hand up, inch by painful inch, his stretched-out forefinger creeping over the Easterner's pitted face while he peered down at it, cross-eyed, trying to tip his head out of the way. His hand gripped painful tight round Logen's wrist, trying to haul it back, but Logen had his shoulder dipped, his weight set right. The finger edged past his grimacing mouth, over his top lip, into Ugly's bent nose, and Logen felt his broken nail digging at the flesh inside. He crooked his finger and bared his teeth, and twisted it about as best he could. The Easterner hissed and thrashed around, but he was hooked. He'd no choice but to grab at Logen's wrist with his other hand and try to drag that tearing finger out of his face. But that left Logen one hand free. He snatched a knife out and grunted as he stabbed, his arm jerking in and out. Quick punches, but with steel on the end of them. The blade squelched in the Easterner's gut, and his thigh, and his arm, and his chest. Blood coming out in long streaks, splattering them both and trickling into the puddles under their boots. Once he was stabbed enough, Logen caught him by his coat, hauled him into the air with a jaw-clenched effort, and roared as he flung him over the battlements. He plummeted away, limp as a carcass and soon to be one, crashed to the ground in among his fellows. Logen bent over the parapet, gasping at the wet air, the raindrops flitting down away from him. There were hundreds of them, it seemed like, milling around in the sea of mud at the base of the wall. Wild men from out past the Crinna, where they hardly spoke right and cared nothing for the dead. They all were rain-soaked and filth-spattered, hiding under rough-made shields and waving rough-forged weapons, barbed and brutal. Their standards stood flapping in the rain behind them, bones and ragged hides, ghostly shadows in the downpour. Some were carrying rickety ladders forwards, or lifting those that had been thrown down, trying to foot them near the wall and haul them up while rocks and spears and sodden arrows flapped and splattered into the mud. Others were climbing, shields held over their heads, 2 ladders up at Dow's side, one on Red Hat's side, one just to Logen's left. A pair of big savages were swinging great axes against the scarred gates, chopping wet splinters out with every blow. Logen pointed at them, screamed uselessly into the wet. No one heard him, or could have over the great noise of drumming rain, of crashing, thudding, scraping, blades on shields, shafts in flesh, battle cries and shrieks of pain. He fumbled his sword up from the puddles on the walkway, dull metal glistening with beads of water. Just near him one of Shiver's carls was facing off against an Easterner who'd scrambled from the top of a ladder. They traded a couple of blows, axe against shield, then sword swishing at the empty air. The Easterner's axe arm went up again and Logen hacked it off at the elbow, stumbled into his back and knocked him screaming on his face. The carl finished him with a chop to the back of the skull, pointed his bloody sword over Logen's shoulder. There, another Easterner with a big hook nose just getting to the top of the ladder, leaning forward over the battlements, right arm going back with a spear ready. Logen bellowed as he came for him. His eyes went wide and the spear wobbled, too late to throw. He tried to swing out of the way, clinging to the wet wood with his free hand, but only managed to drag the ladder grating across the battlements. Logen's sword stabbed him under the arm and he flailed back with a grunt, dropping his spear behind him. Logen stabbed at him again, slipped and lunged too far, near falling into his arms. Big Nose clawed at him, trying to bundle him over the parapet. Logen smashed him in the face with the pommel of his sword and knocked his head back, took some teeth out with a second blow. The third one knocked him senseless, and he fell back off the ladder, plummeting down and taking one of his friends into the mud with him. "Bring that pole," Logen roared at the carl with the sword. "What? Pole, you fucker!" The carl snatched the wet length of wood up and threw it through the rain. Logen dropped his sword and wedged the branched end against one upright of the ladder, started pushing for all he was worth. The carl came and added his weight to it, and the ladder creaked, wobbled, and started tipping back. An Easterner's face came up over the battlements, surprised looking. He saw the pole. He saw Logen, and the carl growling at it. He tumbled off as the ladder dropped away down on the heads of the bastards below. Further along the wall, another ladder had just been pushed back up, and the Easterners were starting to climb it, shields up over their heads while Red Hat and his boys chucked rocks at them. Some had got to the top over on Dow's bit of the wall, and he could hear the shouting from there, the sounds of murder. Logen gnawed at his bloody lip, wondering whether to push on down there and give them some help. But he decided against. He'd be needed here before long. So he took up the Maker's sword, and he nodded to the carl who'd helped him. And he stood and caught his breath. He waited for the Easterners to come again, and all around him men fought and killed and died. Devils in a cold, wet, bloody hell. 4 days of it now, and it felt as if he'd been there forever, as if he'd never left. Perhaps he never had. Like the dogman's life weren't difficult enough already, there had to be rain. Wet was an archer's worst fear, all right, apart from being ridden down by horsemen, maybe, but that weren't so likely up a tower. The bows were slippery, the strings were stretchy, the feathers were sodden, which all made for some ineffective shooting. Rain was costing them their advantage, and that was a worry. But it could cost them more than that before the day was out. There were 3 big wild bastards working at the gates, 2 swinging heavy axes at the softened wood, the third trying to get a pry bar in the gaps they'd made and tear the timbers apart. "If we don't deal with them, they'll have those gates in," Dogman shouted hoarse into the wet air. "Oh," said Grim, nodding his head, water flicking off his shaggy thatch of hair. Took a good bit of bellowing and pointing from him and Tull. But Dogman got a crowd of his lads lined up by the slick parapet, 70 wet bows, all lowered at once, all drawn back creaking, all pointing down towards that gate. 70 men, frowning and taking aim, all dripping with water and getting wetter every minute. "All right then, loose." The bows went more or less together, the sounds muffled. The shafts spun down, bouncing off the wet wall, sticking in the rough wood of the gate, prickling the ground all round where the ditch used to be, before it became just another load of mud. Not what you'd call accurate, but there were a lot of shafts, and if you can't get quality, then numbers will have to do the job for you. The Easterner on the right dropped his axe, 3 arrows sticking out his chest, one through his leg. The one on the left slipped and fell on his side, went floundering for cover, an arrow in his shoulder. The one with the bar went down on his knees, thrashing around and grabbing behind him, trying to get at a shaft in the small of his back. "All right, good," the dogman shouted. None of the rest of them seemed keen to try the gate for the moment, which was something to be grateful for. There were still plenty trying the ladders, but that was a harder task to deal with from up here. They might just as easily shoot their own boys on the walls as the enemy in this weather. Dogman gritted his teeth and loosed a harmless, looping wet arrow down into the milling crowd. Nothing they could do. The walls was Shiver's job, and Dow's and Red Hat's. The walls was Logen's job. There was a crack, loud as the sky falling. The world went reeling bright and soupy slow, sounds all echoing. Logen stumbled through this dram place, the sword clattering out of his stupid fingers, lurched against the wall and grappled with it as it swayed around, trying to understand what had happened and not getting there. 2 men were struggling with each other over a spear, wrestling and jerking round and round, and Logen couldn't remember why. A man with long hair took a great slow blow with a club on his shield, a couple of splinters spinning. Then he swept an axe round, teeth bared and shining, caught a wild-looking man in the legs and tore him off his feet. There were men everywhere, wet and furious, dirt and blood-stained. A battle, maybe. Which side was he on? Logen felt something warm tickling his eye, and he touched his hand to it. Frowned down at his red fingertips, turning pink as the rain pattered on them. Blood. Had someone hit him on the head then? Or was he dreaming it? A memory from long ago. He spun round just before the club came down and crushed his skull like an egg, caught some hairy bastard's wrists with both hands. The world was suddenly fast, noisy, pain pulsing in his head. He lurched against the parapet, staring into a dirty, bearded, angry face, pressed up tight against his. Logen let go the club with one hand, started snatching at his belt for a knife. He couldn't feel one, all that time spent sharpening all those blades. And now he needed one there was nothing to hand. Then he realized. The blade he was looking for was stuck in that ugly bastard, down in the mud somewhere at the base of the wall. He scrabbled round the other side of his belt, still wrestling at the club, but losing that battle now, given that he only had the one hand to work with. Logen got bent back slowly over the battlements. His fingers found the grip of a knife. The hairy Easterner tore his club free and lifted it up, opening his mouth wide and giving a stinking yell. Logen stabbed him right through the face, and the blade went through one cheek and out the other, and took a couple of teeth with it. Hairy's bellow turned to a high-pitched howl, and he dropped his club and stumbled away, eyes bulging. Logen slid down and snatched his sword from under the trampling feet of the two fighting over the spear, waited a moment for the Easterner to come round close to him, then chopped through the back of one thigh and brought him down with a scream where the Carl could see to him. Harry was still drooling blood, one hand on the grip of the knife through his face, trying to work it free. Logen's sword made a red gash through the wet furs on his side, brought him to his knees. The next swing split his head in half. Not 10 strides away, Shivers was in bad trouble, backed up with 3 Easterners at him, another just getting to the top of a ladder, and all his boys kept busy behind. He winced as he took a hard blow from a hammer across his shield, stumbled back, his axe dropping from his hand and clattering on the stone. The thought did pass through Logen's mind that he'd be a deal better off if Shivers got his head flattened, but the odds were good that he'd be next, so he took a great breath and bellowed as he charged. The first one turned just in time to get his face hacked open rather than the back of his skull. The second got his shield up, but Logen went low and chopped clean through his shin instead, sent him shrieking down onto his back, blood pumping out into the pools of water across the walkway. The third one was a big bastard, wild red hair sticking all ways off his head. He had Shivers stunned, and on his knees by the parapet, his shield hanging down, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Red Hair raised a big hammer up to finish the job. Logen stabbed him through the back before he got the chance, the long blade sliding through him right to the hilt. Never take a man face to face if you can kill him from behind, Logen's father used to say. And that was one good piece of advice he'd always tried to follow. Red Hair thrashed and squealed, twisting madly with his last breaths, dragging Logen around after him by the hilt of his sword. But it wasn't long before he dropped. Logen grabbed Shivers under the arm and hauled him up. He frowned hard as his eyes came back into focus, saw who was helping him. He leaned down and snatched his fallen axe up from the stones. Logen wondered for a moment if he was about to get it buried in his skull, but Shivers only stood there, blood running down his wet face from the cut across his head. "Behind you," said Logen, nodding past his shoulder. Shivers turned. Logen did the same, and they stood with their backs to each other. There were 3 or 4 ladders up now, around the gate, and the battle on the walls had broken up into a few separate bloody little fights. There were Easterners clambering over the parapet, screaming their meaningless jabber, hard faces and hard weapons glistening wet, coming at Logen along the wall, while more dragged themselves up. Behind him, he heard the clash and grunt of Shivers fighting, but he paid it no mind. He could only deal with what was in front of him. You have to be realistic about these things. He shuffled back, showing weariness that was only half feigned. Then as the first of them came on, he gritted his teeth and leaped forward, cut him across the face and sent him screaming, hand clasped to his eyes. Logen stumbled into another and got barged in the chest with a shield, its rim catching him under the chin and making him bite his tongue. Logen nearly tripped over the sprawled-out corpse of a dead Carl, righted himself just in time, flailed with his sword and hit nothing, reeled after it and felt something cut into his leg as he went. He gasped and hopped, waving the sword around, all off balance. He lunged at some moving fur. His leg gave under him and he piled into someone. They fell together and Logen's head cracked against the stone. They rolled and Logen struggled up on top, shouting and drooling, tangled his fingers in an Easterner's greasy hair, and smashed his face into the stone, again and again, until his skull went soft. He dragged himself away, heard a blade clang against the walkway where he'd been, hauled himself up to his knees, sword loose in one sticky hand. He knelt there, water running down his face, dragging in air, more of them coming at him, and nowhere to go. His leg was hurting, no strength in his arms. His head felt light, like it might float away. No strength left to fight with, hardly. More of them coming at him. One at the front with thick leather gloves, a big maul in his hands. Its heavy, spiked head red with blood. Looked like he'd already broken one skull with it, and Logen's would be next. Then Bethod would have won at last. Logen felt a cold feeling stab at his gut, a hard, empty feeling. His knuckles clicked as the muscles in his hand went rigid, gripping the sword painful tight. "No," he hissed. No. But he might as well have said no to the rain. That cold feeling spread out, up through Logen's face, tugging his mouth into a bloody smile. Gloves came closer, his maul scraping against the whetstone. He glanced over his shoulder. His head came apart, spraying out blood. Crummock Fail roared like an angry bear, finger bones flying round his neck, his great hammer whirling round and round his head in huge circles. The next Easterner tried to back away, holding up his shield. Crummock's hammer swung two-handed, ripped his legs out from under him, sent him tumbling over and onto his face on the stone. The big hillman sprang up onto the walkway, nimble as a dancer for all his great bulk, caught the next man a blow in the stomach that hurled him through the air and left him crumpled against the battlements. Logen watched one set of savages murdering another, breathing hard as Crummock's boys whooped and screamed, paint on their faces smeared in the rain. They flooded up onto the wall, hacking at the Easterners with their rough swords and their bright axes, driving them back and shoving their ladders away, flinging their bodies over the parapet and into the mud below. He knelt there in a puddle, leaning on the cold grip of Canedia's sword, its point dug into the stone walkway. He bent over and breathed hard, his cold gut sucking in and out, his raw mouth salty, his nose full of the stink of blood. He hardly dared to look up. He clenched his teeth and closed his eyes and hawked sour spit up onto the stones. He forced that cold feeling in his stomach down, and it slunk away, for now at least, and left him with only pain and weariness to worry about. "Looks like those bastards had enough," came Crummock's laughing voice from out of the drizzle. The hillman tipped his head back, mouth open, stuck his tongue out into the rain, then licked his lips. "That was some good work you put in today. Bloody 9. Not that it ain't my special pleasure to watch you at it, but I'm glad to get my share." He hefted his great long hammer up in one hand and spun it round as if it was a willow switch, peering at a great bloody stain on the head with a clump of hair stuck to it, then grinning wide. Logen looked up at him. Hardly enough strength left to lift his head. "We'll go at the back tomorrow, though, eh? Since you're that keen? You can take the fucking wall." The rain was slacking down to a thin spit and drizzle. A glimmer of fading sunlight broke through the sagging clouds, bringing Bethod's camp back into view, his muddy ditch and his standards, tents scattered across the valley. Dogman squinted, thought he could see a few men stood around the front, watching the Easterners run back, a glint of sunlight on something. An eyeglass, maybe, like the Union used, usually to look the wrong way. Dogman wondered if it was Bethod down there, watching it all happen. It would be just like Bethod to have got himself an eyeglass. He felt a big hand clap him on the shoulder. "We gave him a slap, Chief," rumbled Toll, "and a good din, there was small doubt of that." There were a lot of dead Easterners scattered in the mud round the base of that wall, a lot of wounded carried by their mates, or dragging themselves slow and painful back towards their lines. But there were a fair few killed on their side of the wall as well. Dogman could see a stack of muddy corpses over near the back of the fortress where they were doing the burying. He could hear someone screaming, hard and nasty screams, the kind a man makes when he needs a limb taken off, or he's had one off already. "We gave him a slap, aye," Dogman muttered, "but they gave us one as well. I'm not sure how many slaps will stand. The barrels that carried their arrows were no more than half full now, the rocks close to run out. The rocks close to run out. Best send some boys to pick over the dead, he shouted to the men over his shoulder. Get what we can while we can. Can't have too many arrows at a time like this, said Tull. Number of those Krina bastards we killed today. I reckon we'll have more spears tonight than we had this morning. Dogman managed to put a grin on his face. Nice of him to bring us something to fight with. Aye. Reckon they'd get bored right quick if we ran out of arrows. Tool laughed, and he clapped the dogman on the back harder than ever, hard enough to make his teeth rattle. We did well. You did well. We're still alive, ain't we? Some of us are. Dogman looked down at the corpse of the one man who'd died up on the tower. An old boy, hair mostly gray, a rough-made arrow in his neck. Bad luck, that had been, to catch a shaft on a day as wet as today. But you're sure to get a measure of luck in a fight, both good and bad. He frowned down into the darkening valley. Where the hell are the Union at? At least the rain had stopped. You have to be grateful for the small things in life, like some smoky kind of a fire after the wet. You have to be grateful for the small things when any minute might be your last. Logen sat alone beside his scrub of a flame and rubbed gently at his right palm. It was sore, pink, stiff, from gripping the rough hilt of the maker's sword all the long day. Blistered round the joints of his fingers. His head was bruised all over. The cut on his leg was burning some, but he could still walk well enough. He could have ended up a lot worse. There were more than 70 buried now, and they were putting them in pits for a dozen each, just as Crummock had said they would. 70 and more gone back to the mud, and twice that many hurt, a lot of them bad. Over by the big fire he could hear Dow growling about how he'd stabbed some Easterner in the fruits. He could hear Tull's rumbling laughter. Logen hardly felt like a part of it any more. Maybe he never had been. A set of men had fought and beaten. Lives he'd spared, for no reason that made sense. Men who'd hated him worse than death, but been bound to follow. Hardly more his friends than Shivers was. Perhaps the dogman was his only true friend in all the wide circle of the world. And even in his eyes, from time to time, Logen thought he could see that old trace of doubt, that old trace of fear. He wondered if he could see it now, as the dogman came up out of the darkness. You think they'll come tonight? He asked. He'll give it a go in the dark sooner or later, said Logen. But my guess is he'll leave it till we're a bit more worn down. You get more worn down than this. I guess we'll find out, Logen grimaced as he stretched out his aching legs. It really seems like this shit used to be easier. Dogman gave a snort. Not a laugh, really. More just letting Logen know he'd heard. Memory can work some magic. You remember Carlian? Course I do. Logen looked down at his missing finger, and he bunched his fist, so it looked the same as it always had. Strange how it all seemed so simple back in them days. Who you fought for and why. Can't say it ever bothered me. It bothered me, said Dogman. It did. You should have said something. Would you have listened? No, I guess not. They sat there for a minute in silence. You reckon we'll live through this? Asked the dogman. Maybe, if the Union turns up tomorrow or the day after. You think they will? Maybe. We can hope. Hoping for a thing don't make it happen. The opposite, usually. But every day we're still alive is a chance. Maybe this time it'll work. Dogman frowned at the shifting flames. That's a lot of maybes. That's war. Who'd have thought we'd be relying on a bunch of Southerners to solve our problems for us, eh? I reckon you solve them any way you can. You have to be realistic. Being realistic. Being realistic. Then you reckon we'll live through this? Logen thought about it for a while. Maybe. Boots squelched in the soft earth, and Shivers walked up quiet towards the fire. There was a gray bandage wrapped around his head, where he'd taken that cut, and his hair hung down damp and greasy from under it. Chief, he said. Dogman smiled as he got up, and clapped him on the shoulder. All right, Shivers. That was good work today. I'm glad you came over, lad. We all are. He gave Logen a long look. All of us. Think I might try and get a rest for a minute. I'll see you boys when they come again. Most likely it'll be soon enough. He walked off into the night and left Shivers and Logen staring one at the other. Probably Logen should have got his hand near to a knife, watched for sudden moves and all the rest. But he was too tired and too sore for it. So he just sat there and watched. Shivers pressed his lips together squatting down beside the fire opposite, slow and reluctant, as if he was about to eat something he knew was rotten but had no choice. "If I'd have been in your place," he said after a while, "I would have let those bastards kill me today. A few years ago, I'm sure I would have." "What changed?" Logen frowned as he thought about it. Then he shrugged his aching shoulders. "I'm trying to be better than I was. You think that's enough? What else can I do?" Shivers frowned at the fire. "I wanted to say," he worked the words around in his mouth and spat them out, "that I'm grateful, I guess. You saved my life today. I know it." He wasn't happy about saying it, and Logen knew why. It's hard to be done a favor by a man you hate. It's hard to hate him so much afterwards. Losing an enemy can be worse than losing a friend if you've had him for long enough. So Logen shrugged again. "It's nothing. What a man should do for his crew, that's all. I owe you a lot more. I know that. I can never pay what I owe you. No. But it's some kind o' start at it, far as I'm concerned." Shivers got up and took a step away. Then he stopped and turned back, firelight shifting over one side of his hard, angry face. "It ain't ever as simple, is it, as a man is just good or bad? Not even you. Not even Bethod. Not anybody. No." Logen sat and watched the flames moving. "No, it ain't ever that simple. We all got our reasons. Good men and bad men. It's all a matter of where you stand." Chapter 26. The Perfect Couple. One of Jezal's countless footmen perched on the stepladder and lowered the crown with frowning precision onto his head, its single enormous diamond flashing pricelessly bright. He gave it the very slightest twist back and forth, the fur-trimmed rim gripping Jezal's skull. He climbed back down, whisked the stepladder away, and surveyed the result. So did half a dozen of his fellows. One of them stepped forward to tweak the precise positioning of Jezal's gold-embroidered sleeve. Another grimaced as he flicked an infinitesimal speck of dust from his pure white collar. "Very good," said Bayaz, nodding thoughtfully to himself. "I believe that you are ready for your wedding." The peculiar thing, now that Jezal had a rare moment to think about it, was that he had not, in any way of which he was aware, agreed to get married. He had neither proposed nor accepted a proposal. He had never actually said yes to anything. And yet, here he was, preparing to be joined in matrimony in a few short hours, and to a woman he scarcely knew at all. It had not escaped his notice that in order to have been managed so quickly, the arrangements must have been well underway before Bayaz had even suggested the notion, perhaps before Jezal had even been crowned, but he supposed it was not so very surprising. Since his enthronement, he had drifted helplessly through one incomprehensible event after another, like a man shipwrecked and struggling to keep his head above water, out of sight of land, dragged who knew where by unseen, irresistible currents, but considerably better dressed. He was gradually starting to realize that the more powerful a man became, the fewer choices he really had. Captain Jezal Dan Luther had been able to eat what he liked, to sleep when he liked, to see who he liked. His August Majesty King Jezal I, on the other hand, was bound by invisible chains of tradition, expectation, and responsibility that prescribed every aspect of his existence, however small. Bayaz took a discerning step forward. "Perhaps the top button undone here." Jezal jerked away with some annoyance. The attention of the Magus to every tiny detail of his life was becoming more than tiresome. It seemed that he could scarcely use the latrine without the old bastard poking through the results. "I know how to button a coat," he snapped. "Should I expect to find you here tonight when I bring my new wife to our bedchamber, ready to instruct me on how best to use my prick?" The footmen coughed and averted their eyes and scraped away towards the corners of the room. Bayaz himself neither smiled nor frowned. "I stand always ready to advise your Majesty, but I had hoped that might be one item of business you could manage alone. I hope you're well prepared for our little outing." "I've been getting ready all morn." Artie froze when she looked up and saw Glokta's face. "What happened to you?" "What? This?" He waved his hand at the mottled mass of bruises. "A Kantic woman broke into my apartments in the night, punched me repeatedly, and near drowned me in the bath. An experience I would not recommend." Evidently she did not believe him. "What really happened?" "I fell down the stairs." "Ah, stairs. They can be brutal bastards when you're not that firm on your feet." She stared at her half-full glass, her eyes slightly misty. "Are you drunk?" "It's the afternoon, isn't it? I try always to be drunk by now. Once you start a job, you should give it your best. Or so my father liked to tell me. Glokta narrowed his eyes at her, and she stared back evenly over the rim of her glass. No trembling lip, no tragic face, no streaks of bitter tears down the cheek. She seemed no less happy than usual. Or no more unhappy, perhaps. But Jezal Dan Luther's wedding day can be no joyous occasion for her. No one appreciates being jilted, whatever the circumstances. No one enjoys being abandoned. We need not go, you know. Glokta winced as he tried unsuccessfully to stretch some movement into his wasted leg, and the wince itself caused a ripple of pain through his split lips and across his battered face. I certainly won't complain if I do not have to walk another step today. We can sit here and talk of rubbish and politics and miss the king's marriage, gasped Adi, one hand pressed to her chest in fake horror. But I really must see what the Princess Therese is wearing. They say she is the most beautiful woman in the world, and even scum like me must have someone to look up to. She tipped back her head and swilled down the last of her wine. Having fucked the groom is really no excuse for missing a wedding, you know. The flagship of Grand Duke Orso of Talons plowed slowly, deliberately, majestically forwards, under no more than quarter sail. A host of seabirds flapping and calling in the rich blue sky above. It was by far the largest ship that Jezal, or anyone among the vast crowds that lined the quay and crammed the roofs and windows of the buildings along the waterfront, had ever laid eyes upon. It was decked out in its finest. Colored bunting fluttered from the rigging, and its 3 towering masts were hung with bright flags, the sable cross of Talons and the golden sun of the Union, side by side in honor of the happy occasion. But it looked no less menacing for that. It looked as Logen Ninefingers might have in a dandy's jacket, unmistakably still a man of war, and appearing more savage rather than less for the gaudy finery in which it was plainly uncomfortable. As the means of bringing a single woman to Adua, and that woman Jezal's bride-to-be, this mighty vessel was anything but reassuring. It implied that Grand Duke Orso might be an intimidating presence as a father-in-law. Jezal saw sailors now, crawling among the myriad ropes like ants through a bush, bringing the acres of sailcloth in with well-practiced speed. They let the mighty ship plow forward under its own momentum, its vast shadow falling over the quay and plunging half the welcoming party into darkness. It slowed, the air full of the creaking of timbers and hawsers. It came to a deliberate stop, dwarfing the now tiny-seeming boats meekly tethered to either side as a tiger might dwarf kittens. The golden figurehead, a woman twice life-size thrusting a spear towards the heavens, glittered menacingly far over Jezal's head. A huge wharf had been specially constructed in the middle of the quay where the draft was at its deepest. Down this gently sloping ramp the royal party of Talons descended into Adua, like visitors from a distant star, where everyone was rich, beautiful, and obliviously happy. To either side marched a row of bearded guardsmen, all dressed in identical black uniforms, their helmets polished to a painful pitch of mirror brightness. Between them, in 2 rows of 6, came a dozen ladies in waiting, each one arrayed in red, or blue, or vivid purple silks, each one as splendid as a queen herself. But not one of the awestruck multitude on the waterfront could have been in any doubt who was the center of attention. The Princess Therese glided along at the fore, tall, slender, impossibly regal, as graceful as a circus dancer, and as stately as an empress of legend. Her pure white gown was stitched with glittering gold. Her shimmering hair was the color of polished bronze. A chain of daunting diamonds flashed and sparkled on her pale chest in the bright sunlight. The Jewel of Talons seemed at that moment an apt name indeed. Therese looked as pure and dazzling, as proud and brilliant, as hard and beautiful as a flawless gemstone. As her feet touched the stones, the crowds burst out into a tumultuous cheer, and flower petals began to fall in well-orchestrated cascades from the windows of the buildings high above. So it was that she advanced on Jezal with magnificent dignity, her head held imperiously high, her hands clasped proudly before her, over a soft carpet and through a sweet-smelling haze of fluttering pink and red. To call it a breathtaking entrance would have been an understatement of an epic order. "Your august majesty," she murmured, somehow managing to make him feel like the humble one as she curtsied, and behind her the ladies followed suit, and the guardsmen bowed low, all with impeccable coordination. "My father," The Grand Duke Orso of Talons sends his profound apologies." And she rose up perfectly erect again, as though hoisted by invisible strings. "But urgent business in Styria prevents him from attending our wedding." "You are all we need," croaked Jezal, cursing silently a moment later as he realized he had completely ignored the proper form of address. It was somewhat difficult to think clearly, under the circumstances. Therese was even more breathtaking now than when he had last seen her, a year or more ago, arguing savagely with Prince Ladisla at the feast held in his honor. The memory of her vicious shrieking did little to encourage him, but then Jezal would hardly have been delighted by the prospect of marrying Ladisla himself. After all, the man had been a complete ass. Jezal was an entirely different sort of person, and could no doubt expect a different response. So he hoped. "Please, Your Highness." And he held out his hand to her. She rested hers on it, seeming to weigh less than a feather. "Your Majesty does me too much honor." The hooves of the grey horses crackled on the paving. The carriage wheels whirred smoothly. They set off up the Kingsway, a company of knights of the body riding in tight formation around them, arms and armor glinting, each stride of the great thoroughfare lined with appreciative commoners, each door and window filled with smiling subjects, all there to cheer for their new king, and for the woman soon to be their queen. Jezal knew he must look an utter idiot next to her, a clumsy, low-born, ill-mannered oaf, who had not the slightest right to share her carriage, unless perhaps she was using him as a footrest. He had never in his life felt truly inferior before. He could scarcely believe that he was marrying this woman. Today, his hands were shaking, positively shaking. Perhaps some heartfelt words might help them both relax. "Therese," she continued to wave imperiously to the crowds, "I realize that we do not know each other in the least, but I would like to know you." The slightest twitch of her mouth was the only sign that she had heard him. "I know that this must have come as a terrible shock to you, just as it has to me. I hope if there is anything I can do to make it easier that my father feels the interests of my country are best served by this marriage, and it is a daughter's place to obey. Those of us born to high station are long prepared to make sacrifices." Her perfect head turned smoothly on her perfect neck, and she smiled. A smile slightly forced, perhaps, but no less radiant for that. It was hard to believe that a face so smooth and flawless could be made of meat. Like everybody else. It seemed like porcelain, or polished stone. It was a constant, magical delight to see it move. He wondered if her lips were cool or warm. He would have liked very much to find out. She leaned close to him, and placed her hand gently on the back of his. Warm, undoubtedly warm and soft, and very much made of flesh. "You really should wave," she murmured, her voice full of Styrian song. Yes," he croaked, his mouth very dry. "Yes, of course." Glokta stood, Ade beside him, and frowned at the doors of the Lord's Round. Beyond those towering gates in the great circular hall, the ceremony was taking place. "Oh, joyous, joyous day!" High Justice Moravia's wise exhortations would be echoing from the gilded dome. The happy couple would be speaking their solemn vows with light hearts. Only the lucky few had been allowed within to bear witness. The rest of us must worship from afar. And quite a crowd had gathered to do just that. The wide square of marshals was choked with them. Glokta's ears were stuffed with their excited babbling, a sycophantic throng, all eager for their divine majesties to emerge. He rocked impatiently back and forth, from side to side, grimacing and hissing, trying to get the blood to flow in his aching legs, the cramps to be still. But standing in one place for this length of time is, to put it simply, torture. "How long can a wedding take?" Ardi raised one dark eyebrow. "Perhaps they couldn't keep their hands off each other, and are busy consummating the marriage right there on the floor of the Lord's Round. How bloody long can a consummation take? How bloody long can a consummation take?" "Lean on me if you need to," she said, holding out her elbow to him. The cripple using the drunk for support, Glokta frowned. "We make quite the couple. Fall over if you prefer and knock out the rest of your teeth. I'll lose no sleep over it. Perhaps I should take her up on the offer, if only for a moment. After all, where's the harm?" But then the first shrill cheers began to float up, soon joined by more and more until a jubilant roar was making the air throb. The doors of the Lord's Round were finally being heaved open, and the High King and Queen of the Union emerged into the bright sunlight, hand in hand. Even Glokta was forced to admit that they made a dazzling pair. Like monarchs of myth, they stood arrayed in brilliant white, trimmed with twinkling embroidery, matching golden suns across the back of her long gown and his long coat, glittering as they turned to the crowds. Each tall and slender and graceful, each crowned with shining gold and a single flashing diamond, both so very young and so very beautiful, and with all their happy, rich, and powerful lives ahead of them. Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah for them! My shriveled turd of a heart bursts open with joy. Glokta rested his hand on Ardi's elbow, and he leaned towards her, and he smiled his most twisted, toothless, grotesque grin. Is it really true that our king is more handsome than I? Offensive nonsense. She thrust out her chest and tossed her head, giving Glokta a withering sneer down her nose. And I sparkle more brightly than the jewel of talons. Oh, you do, my dear. You absolutely do. We make them look like beggars, like scum, like cripples. They chuckled together as the royal pair swept majestically across the square, accompanied by a score of watchful knights of the body. The close council followed behind at a respectful distance, 11 stately old men with Bayaz among them in his arcane vestments, smiling almost as wide as the glorious couple themselves. I didn't even like him, muttered Ardi under her breath. To begin with, not really. That certainly makes 2 of us. No need to weep. You're far too sharp to have been satisfied with a dullard like him. She breathed in sharply. I'm sure you're right, but I was so bored and lonely and tired and drunk, no doubt. She shrugged her shoulders hopelessly. He made me feel like I was something more than a burden. He made me feel wanted. And what makes you suppose that I want to know about it? Wanted, you say? How wonderful! And now? She looked miserably down at the ground, and Glokta felt just the smallest trace of guilt. But guilt only really hurts when there's nothing else to worry about. It was hardly as if it was true love. He saw the thin sinews in her neck moving as she swallowed. But somehow I always thought it would be me making a fool of him. How rarely any of us get what we expect. The royal party processed gradually out of view, the last splendid courtiers and shining bodyguards tramping after them. The sound of rapturous applause creeping off towards the palace, towards their glorious futures, and we guilty secrets are by no means invited. Here we stand, murmured Ade, the offcuts, the wretched leavings, the rotten stalks. I wouldn't worry over much. Glokta gave a sigh. You are still young, clever, and possibly pretty. Epic praise indeed. You have all your teeth and both your legs. A marked advantage over some of us. I do not doubt that you will soon find some other high-born idiot to entrap, and no harm done. She turned away from him and hunched her shoulders, and he guessed that she was biting her lip. He winced and lifted his hand to lay it on her shoulder, the same hand that cut Sepp Dan Teufel's fingers into slices, that pinched the nipples from Inquisitor Harker's chest, that carved one Gurkish emissary into pieces and burned another, that sent innocent men to rot in England, and so on, and so on. He jerked it back and let it fall. Better to cry all the tears in the world than be touched by that hand. Comfort comes from other sources, and flows to other destinations. He frowned out across the square and left Ardi to her misery. The crowd cheered on. It was a magnificent event, of course. No effort or expense had been spared. Jezal would not have been at all surprised if he had 500 guests, and no more than a dozen of them known to himself in any significant degree. The lords and ladies of the Union, the great men of closed and open councils, the richest and the most powerful, dressed in their best and on their best behavior. The Chamber of Mirrors was a fitting venue, the most spectacular room in the entire palace, as big as a battlefield, and made to seem larger yet by the great mirrors which covered every wall, creating the disconcerting impression of dozens of other magnificent weddings in dozens of other magnificent weddings. Adjoining ballrooms, a multitude of candles flickered and waved on the tables, and in the sconces, and among the crystal chandeliers high above. Their soft light shone on the silverware, glittered on the jewels of the guests, and was reflected back from the dark walls, gleaming into the far, dim distance. a million points of light, like the stars in a dark night sky. A dozen of the Union's finest musicians played subtle and entrancing music, and it mingled with the swell of satisfied chatter, the clink and rattle of old money and new cutlery. For the guests. For Jezal it was something else, and he was not sure what. He sat at a gilded table with his queen beside him, the two of them outnumbered 10-1 by fawning servants, displayed to the full view of the whole assembly, as though they were a pair of prize exhibits in a zoo. Jezal sat in a haze of awkwardness, in a dreamlike silence, startling from time to time like a sick rabbit as a powdered footman blindsided him with vegetables. Therese sat on his right, occasionally spearing the slightest morsel with a discerning fork, lifting it, chewing it, swallowing it with elegant precision. Jezal had never thought that it was possible to eat beautifully. He now realized his mistake. He could scarcely remember the ringing words of the high justice that had, he supposed, bound the two of them irrevocably together. Something about love and the security of the nation, he vaguely recalled. But he could see the ring that he had handed numbly to Therese in the Lord's round, its enormous blood-red stone glittering on her long middle finger. He chewed at a slice of the finest meat, and it tasted like mud in his mouth. They were man and wife. He saw now that Bayaz had been right, as always. The people longed for something effortlessly higher than themselves. They might not all have had the king they would have asked for, but no one could possibly deny that Therese was all a queen should be and more. The mere idea of R.D. West sitting in that gilded chair was absurd, and yet Jezal felt a pang of guilt when the idea occurred, closely followed by a greater one of sadness. It would have been a comfort to have someone to talk to then. He gave a painful sigh. If he was to spend his life with this woman, they would have to speak. The sooner they began, he supposed, the better. I hear that Talons is a most beautiful city. Indeed, she said with careful formality. But Adua has its sights also. She paused and looked down unhopefully at her plate. Jezal cleared his throat. This is somewhat difficult to adjust to. He ventured a fraction of a smile. She blinked and looked out at the room. It is. Do you dance? She turned her head smoothly to look at him without the slightest apparent movement of her shoulders. A little. He pushed back his chair and stood up. Then shall we, Your Majesty? As you wish, Your Majesty. As they made their way towards the middle of the wide floor, the chatter gradually diminished. The chamber of mirrors grew deathly quiet aside from the clicking of his polished boots and her polished shoes on the glistening stone. Jezal swallowed as they took their places, surrounded on three sides by the long tables and the legions of magnificent guests, all watching. He had rather that same feeling of breathless anticipation, of fear and excitement, that he used to have when he stepped into the fencing circle against an unknown opponent, before the roaring crowd. They stood still as statues, looking into each other's eyes. He held out his hand, palm up. She reached out, but instead of taking it, she pressed the back of her hand firmly against the back of his and pushed it up so that their fingers were level. She lifted one eyebrow by the slightest margin, a silent challenge that no one else in the hall could possibly have seen. The first long drawn-out note sobbed from the strings and echoed around the chamber. They set off, circling each other with exaggerated slowness, the golden hem of Therese's dress swishing across the floor, her feet out of sight so that she appeared to glide rather than take steps, her chin held painfully high. They moved first one way, and then the other, and in the mirrors around them 1,000 other couples moved in time, stretching away into the shadowy distance, crowned and dressed in flawless white and gold. As the second phrase began, and other instruments joined in, Jezal began to realize that he was utterly outclassed, worse than ever he had been by Bremer Dan Gorst. Therese moved with such immaculate poise that he was sure she could have balanced a glass of wine on her head without spilling a drop. The music grew louder, faster, bolder, and Therese's movements came faster and bolder with it. It seemed as if she somehow controlled the musicians with her outstretched hands. The two were linked so perfectly. He tried to steer her, and she stepped effortlessly around him. She feinted one way and whirled the other, and Jezal almost went over on his arse. She dodged and spun with masterful disguise and left him lunging at nothing. The music grew faster yet. The musicians sawed and plucked with furious concentration. Jezal made a vain attempt to catch her, but Therese twisted away, dazzling him with a flurry of skirts that he could barely follow. She almost tripped him with a foot, which was gone before he knew it, tossed her head, and almost stabbed him in the eye with her crown. The great and good of the Union looked on in enchanted silence. Even Jezal found himself a dumbstruck spectator. It was the most he could do to remain in roughly the right positions to be made an utter fool of. He was not sure whether he was relieved or disappointed when the music slowed again, and she offered out her hand as though it were a rare treasure. He pressed the back of his against it, and they circled each other, drawing closer and closer. As the last refrain wept from the instruments, she pressed herself against him, her back to his chest. Slowly they turned, and slower still, his nose full of the smell of her hair. At the last long note she sank back, and he lowered her gently, her neck stretching out, her head dropping, her delicate crown almost brushing the floor. And there was silence. The room broke into rapturous applause, but Jezal hardly heard them. He was too busy staring at his wife. There was a faint color to her cheek now, her lips slightly parted, exposing flawless front teeth, and the lines of her jaw and stretched-out neck and slender collarbones were etched with shadow and ringed with sparkling diamonds. Lower down her chest rose and fell imperiously in her bodice with her rapid breathing, the slightest fascinating sheen of sweat nestling in her cleavage. Jezal would have very much liked to nestle there himself. He blinked, his own breath sharp in his throat. "If it please your majesty," she murmured. "Your majesty is too kind," she replied, with the barest fragment of a smile. But a smile nonetheless. He beamed gormlessly back at her. His fear and confusion had, in the space of a single dance, smoothly transformed into a most pleasurable excitement. He had been gifted a glimpse beneath the icy shell, and plainly his new queen was a woman of rare and fiery passion, a hidden side to her that he was now greatly looking forward to investigating further, looking forward so sharply, in fact, that he was forced to avert his eyes and stare off into the corner, frowning and trying desperately to think of other things, lest the tightness of his trousers caused him to embarrass himself in front of the assembled guests. The sight of Bayaz grinning in the corner was for once just what he needed to see, the old man's cold smile cooling his ardor as surely as a bucket of iced water. Glokta had left our day in her over-furnished living room, making every effort to get even more drunk. And ever since he had found himself in a black mood. Even for me. There's nothing like the company of someone even more wretched than yourself to make you feel better. Trouble is, take their misery away and your own presses in twice as cold and dreary behind it. He slurped another half-mouthful of gritty soup from his spoon, grimaced as he forced the over-salty slop down his throat. "I wonder how wonderful a time King Jezal is enjoying now?" Lauded and admired by all, gorging himself on the best food and the best company. He dropped the spoon into the bowl, his left eye twitching, and winced at a ripple of pain through his back and down into his leg. 8 years since the Gurkish released me, yet I am still their prisoner, and always will be. Trapped in a cell no bigger than my own crippled body. The door creaked open, and Barnum shuffled in to collect the bowl. Glokta looked from the half-dead soup to the half-dead old man. The best food, and the best company. He would have laughed if his split lips had allowed it. "Finished, sir?" asked the servant. "More than likely. I have been unable to pull the means of destroying Bayaz out of my arse, and so, of course, His Eminence will not be pleased. How displeased can he get, do we suppose, before he loses patience entirely? But what can be done?" Barnum carried the bowl from the room, pulled the door shut behind him, and left Glokta alone with his pain. "What is it that I did to deserve this? And what is it that Luther did? Is he not just as I was? Arrogant, vain, and selfish as hell? Is he a better man? Then why has life punished me so harshly and rewarded him so richly?" But Glokta already knew the answer. The same reason that innocent Sepp Dan Teufel languishes in England with his fingers shortened. The same reason that loyal General Visbruck died in Dagoska, while treacherous Magister Eider was let lie. The same reason that Tulkas, the Gurkish ambassador, was butchered in front of a howling crowd for a crime he did not commit. He pressed his sore tongue into one of his few remaining teeth. Life is not fair. Jezal pranced down the hallway in a dream, but no longer the panicked nightmare of the morning. His head was spinning from praise and applause and approval. His body was glowing with dancing and wine, and increasingly, lust. With Therese beside him, for the first time in his brief reign, he truly felt like a king. Gems and metal, silk and embroidery, and pale, smooth skin all shone excitingly in the soft candlelight. The evening had turned out to be a delight, and the night promised only to be better yet. Therese might have seemed as hard as a jewel from a distance, but Jezal had held her in his arms, and he knew better. The great paneled doors of the royal bedchamber were held open by a pair of cringing footmen, then shut silently as the king and queen of the Union swept past. The mighty bed dominated the far side of the room, sprays of tall feathers at the corners of its canopy, casting long shadows up onto the gilded ceiling. Its rich green curtains hung invitingly wide, the silken space beyond filled with soft and tantalizing shadows. Therese took a few slow steps into the chamber ahead of him, her head bowed, while Jezal turned the key in the lock with a long, smooth rattling of wards. His breath came fast as he stepped up behind his wife, lifted his hand and placed it gently on her bare shoulder. He felt the muscles stiffen under her smooth skin, smiled at her nervousness, matching his own so closely. He wondered if he should say something to try and calm her. But what would have been the purpose? They both knew what had to happen now, and Jezal, for one, was impatient to begin. He came closer, slipping his free hand around her waist, feeling his palm hiss over rough silk. He brushed the nape of her neck with his lips. Once, twice, 3 times. He nuzzled against her hair, dragging in her fragrance, and breathing it out softly against the side of her face. He felt her tremble at his breath upon her skin, but that only encouraged him. He slid his fingers over her shoulder and across her chest, her diamonds trailing over the back of his hand as he slipped it down into her bodice. He moved up closer yet, pressing himself against her, making a satisfied growl in his throat, his prick nudging pleasantly into her backside through their clothes. In a moment she had torn away from him with a gasp, spun around and slapped him across the face with a smack that set his head ringing. "You filthy bastard!" she shrieked in his face, spit flying from her twisted mouth. "You son of a fucking whore! How dare you touch me?" Ladisla was a cretin, but at least his blood was clean. Jezal gaped, one hand pressed against his burning face, his whole body rigid with shock. He reached out feebly with his other hand. But oof! Her knee caught him between the legs with pitiless accuracy, driving the wind from his chest, making him teeter for a breathless moment, then bringing him down like a sledgehammer to a house of cards. As he slid groaning to the carpet in that special shooting agony that only a blow to the fruits can produce, it was little consolation that he had been right. His queen was quite evidently a woman of rare and fiery passion. The tears flowing so liberally from his eyes were not just of pain and awful surprise and temporary disappointment. They were increasingly of deepening horror. It seemed that he had misjudged Therese's feelings most seriously. She had smiled for the crowds, but now, in private, she gave every indication of despising him and all he stood for. The fact that he had been born a bastard was hardly something he could ever change. For all he knew, his wedding night was about to be spent on the royal floor. The queen had already hurried across the room, and the curtains of the bed were tightly drawn against him. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.